Chapter 422. When night fell, it was quiet both inside and outside the bedroom. The window opposite the bed was half open, and a faint beam of starlight shone in from outside, falling into the dark room. Lu Chun and the black dog lay down, but they were not asleep yet. Because Atsu was growing bigger and bigger, a normal bed could no longer accommodate it to sleep with Lu Chun. Therefore, Atsu had been sleeping on the ground these days. But even on the ground, Atsu slept close to the bed. Its huge body was already higher than the edge of the bed, so Lu Chun could easily touch its body and head if he stretched out his hand. Now, Lu Chun gently placed one hand on Atsu's back, lying on his side. After a long silence in the dark, he suddenly said, "Atsu, it seems that the message that your serious dad asked me to pass on is not going to be easy." Atsu raised its head, and its huge head immediately went over the edge of the bed. Its two bright and deep eyes glanced at Lu Chun. Deep in the depths of its eyes was the faint green light that would appear whenever it was in the dark. To be honest, the current Atsu, no matter how one looked at it, was no longer the pathetic and weak mud of the past. Its body was abnormally tall and strong. Its fangs were as sharp as knives, and the claws on its four limbs could even cut through iron. When its head appeared beside the bed, it looked more like an extremely terrifying monster, making people feel a kind of soul-stirring fear. However, of course, Lu Chun was not afraid of Atsu. He kept patting Atsu's head with his hand, and the Atsu, which seemed to be much stronger than this human, was also very close to Lu Chun. It seemed to enjoy his touch, rubbing its head against his palm from time to time, and occasionally sticking out its tongue to lick him. Unlike Atsu's dad in the Great Snow Mountain, Lu Chun could not speak the human language, even though Atsu looked very strong and fierce. Therefore, most of the time, Lu Chun could only talk to himself. But it seemed that he was already used to it. Therefore, after a while, Lu Chun continued talking to himself. He did not wait for Atsu's reply or any other reaction. He said, "That old man Tai whose status is too high. It's really difficult for us to meet him. If we go to him honestly, we'll definitely be thrown out. But if we use the identity of the dead Baldy to meet him, of course, we can't do that either. There'll be too many troubles in the future." Atsu's head shrank a little, and then it lay down on its two front legs. With the help of the faint starlight, the black dog's expression did not change at all, as if what Lu Chun said had nothing to do with it, or the task that its father Sirius had instructed it to do in the past had nothing to do with it. Lu Chun also saw Atsu's reaction, and he could not help but laugh. He scolded, and then said with a smile, This is something that your old man has instructed you to do. Why don't you care at all?" Atsu yawned lazily, as if it was too lazy to even bark. Lu Chun did not care about it. After a moment of silence, he said slowly, "Actually, there's another layer of trouble in this matter. Perhaps it's even more troublesome than the previous two problems." He glanced at Atsu, lowered his voice, and said, "Your father Sirius asked me to pass on a message, to ask that old man Tai who to return the leaf that he borrowed years ago. I've thought about this sentence many times, and I've always felt that it's not quite right. Taihu is a deity transformation stage, true monarch, and Sirius is an ancient species, one of the most powerful and terrifying giant beasts in the world. So, what kind of leaf was it that was worth them making a deal? And after so many years, Sirius still refused to give up, and even sent people to pursue it." Lu Chun sighed and said to Atsu, "Why do I have a feeling that maybe it wasn't just borrowing that year?" Atsu let out a low cry, and for a moment, no one knew what it meant. Lu Chun stroked its head, thought for a moment, and said, "If that thing is really that important, or if that old man Tai who has a bad heart and doesn't want to return it, do you think he'll directly slap me to death if I go up to him?" Atsu ignored him and looked a little sleepy, as if it was about to fall asleep. Lu Chun glanced at it, shook his head, and scolded jokingly. He turned over and lay flat on the bed. After a moment of silence, he muttered to himself, "Forget it. Let's put this matter off for now and see if there's a suitable opportunity in the future. Anyway, Sirius didn't give me any deadline." He closed his eyes, and the corner of his mouth twitched slightly, as if he was about to fall asleep. But after a while, he softly muttered to himself, "Leaf? In this world, there's a leaf that can attract the attention of a deity transformation stage true monarch? Perhaps there's only one." His voice gradually faded and gradually disappeared into the darkness. He didn't know if it was because Lu Chan had pissed her off that day, but White Lotus hadn't come looking for him for the past few days. Although Lu Chan couldn't ask for more, he was still a little surprised, because according to his understanding of White Lotus, she should not be such an irritable and impulsive person. However, without White Lotus, it was certainly more convenient for Lu Chan and Old Ma to act, even if White Lotus was now a trusted follower of Supreme Tianlan. However, neither Lu Chan nor Old Ma really or openly discussed this matter, but they had always ignored or disapproved of the rumor that Supreme Tianlan would accept White Lotus as his personal disciple. Today, they were going out again. As usual, Lu Chan went to the warehouse, grabbed a large piece of demon beast meat, and threw it to Atsu. Atsu happily picked it up, ran to the grass, and gnawed on it. Then Lu Chan and Old Ma left. Before going out, Lu Chan looked back and saw that Atsu was lying in the grass eating meat happily as usual. Logically speaking, after it finished eating this piece of superior demon beast meat, it should go back to its room to sleep. Lu Chan closed the door with a smile, and then walked forward with Old Ma. Today was the day they went to find a new person on the list. Behind them, the house was getting farther and farther away. In the small courtyard of the house, it was very quiet inside and outside. The only sound was probably the harsh sound of meat chewing in this quiet atmosphere. Atsu obviously didn't feel anything about the atmosphere or the scenery. It just wanted to eat the delicious meat in front of its mouth. After an unknown period of time, a figure suddenly landed lightly from midair and stood in the courtyard. Atsu stood up almost immediately and let out a low roar. The hair on its back stood up, and its fierce and terrifying posture was like that of a ferocious demon beast, causing people to be intimidated. However, after a moment, the roar suddenly stopped. Atsu tilted its head and looked at the figure in front of it. A trace of surprise appeared in its eyes. It was a young girl dressed in white. Her appearance was exceptionally beautiful. It was White Lotus. She walked forward, looked at Atsu, smiled, and even waved her hand, saying to Atsu, "Long time no see, Atsu." Of course, it was impossible for Atsu and this girl to not have seen each other for a long time. At the very least, they had met outside the Immortal City. However, although Atsu was now fierce and terrifying and was much taller than White Lotus when standing up, it still had some fear towards White Lotus. It stood up and let out a low roar. Its pair of huge eyes stared straight at White Lotus, as if it didn't dare to relax at all. On the contrary, White Lotus looked much more relaxed. She first looked around, then nodded and said, "It's a good place to live." She then looked at the piece of demon beast meat in front of Atsu and frowned slightly. Then she smiled and said, "Eating so well, Lu Chan really cares about you." Atsu didn't have any reaction. White Lotus just looked at Atsu and suddenly extended a hand to wave at it. Then she smiled warmly and said, "Atsu, come here. I'll take you to a very fun place." Chapter 423. I heard that there has been some movement on Mount Tianlong recently. Lu Chan asked Old Ma while walking on the street. Old Ma shook his head and said, "It's not really a movement. It's just that the master of the Starry Temple, Guyu, suddenly sent a secret letter to the other 5 perfected immortals. No one knows what the content is, but I heard that the other 5 perfected immortals have agreed to go." Lu Chan thought for a while and said, "I remember that they haven't had a gathering like this for a long time, right?" "Yes, it's been many years," Old Ma said. "I also don't remember seeing them gather together." Lu Chan was silent for a while, and there was a glimmer in the depths of his eyes. Then he asked Old Ma, "Don't you think it's a little strange? The true Immortal Alliance is so big, but it's all under the control of the 6 of them. To put it bluntly, it's not an exaggeration to say that the entire human cultivation world is under their control. But why haven't they gathered to discuss anything for so many years?" Old Ma touched his chin as if he was a little speechless about this. After a while, he said, Maybe the 6 perfected immortals think that they can control the world without a gathering. Towards the end, he seemed to feel that what he said was a little unreasonable. He could only smile and shake his head, saying, well, who knows? Anyway, at the level of perfected immortals of Huashan Realm, they are half human and half god, almost the same as immortals. So it's different from what we think. Lu Chan said expressionlessly. Perfected immortals of Huashan Realm are also human. Old Ma was shocked and turned to look at him, only to see that Lu Chan was looking straight ahead without any expression on his face, as if what he said just now was just a casual remark. He hesitated for a while, as if he wanted to say something, but in the end he stopped and shook his head without saying anything. At this moment, Lu Chan suddenly asked him again, do you know when the gathering of those old men is scheduled? Old Ma said, oh, it's not a secret. It should be today. After all, this is the headquarters of Zhengxiaming on Mount Celestial Dragon, so there's nothing to be afraid of. Moreover, the 6 of them are all big shots with a slight move, so it's hard for them to escape the eyes and ears of others. Lu Chan grunted. After a moment of silence, he suddenly smiled and said to Old Ma, to be honest, this is a rare scene. Most people in the world would find it extremely difficult to meet even one deity transformation perfected monarch in their lifetime, let alone 6 of them. Old Ma laughed and nodded. That's true. Now that you mention it, I also want to watch from the Starry Hall. Lu Chan didn't say anything and smiled. He looked up and saw that on this day, the sun had just risen and the rays of light were shining down from the sky. The huge white tiger statue occupied the city, looking down at the people, bathed in the golden light, looking unusually majestic. For some reason, Lu Chan always had a feeling that the eyes of the white tiger statue seemed to be staring at him from afar. In the courtyard of the house deep in the alley of Horse-Washing Bridge, White Lotus's beautiful and refined face had a smile. She looked harmless and incomparably beautiful. Anyone who saw her would have a feeling of love and adoration, except for the black dog in front of her. The black dog seemed to be very vigilant towards this beautiful girl. Although for some reason, it didn't make any aggressive moves, but it was obvious that Atsu didn't have any intention of being close to White Lotus. It slowly stood up and stared at White Lotus. Its head and shoulders were slightly tilted down, looking like a beast about to pounce on its prey. It could be said that it was defending itself, but it also had a hint of warning in it. White Lotus waited in place for a while. She saw that the huge black dog was still vigilantly looking at her, as if it was facing a great enemy. It didn't have the slightest intention of being obedient. The corner of her mouth twitched, as if she was secretly gritting her teeth. Then she snorted and said, I say, do you really have to go so far? It's been a few years since that incident on Kunlun Mountain. Even your master didn't shout to kill me all day long. You little bastard, you actually bear a grudge? Atsu stared at her. Although it couldn't speak, it made a low growl from its throat. At the same time, its sharp white fangs slowly opened and closed, as if it was still showing off. White Lotus rubbed the space between her eyebrows with her fingers. She seemed to be a little annoyed. She looked at the ground from the corner of her eyes and saw the half-eaten demon beast meat on the ground. She sighed and said, why don't you come with me and do me a favor? I'll give you better demon beast meat later. What do you think? Atsu blinked and snorted. It had an uninterested look on its face. If it was described in human terms, it would probably be snorting disdainfully. White Lotus was taken aback. She seemed to have a whole new level of respect for this dog. She said in surprise, you're not greedy anymore? Atsu glanced at her and then looked at a place outside the courtyard. There was a large room called the warehouse. It had followed Lu Chan in there. The demon beast meat filled the room like a small mountain. Trying to cheat a dog with this kind of demon beast meat? That's not going to work. Atsu glanced at the demon beast meat on the ground. It seemed that it didn't want to pay attention to this woman. It was ready to continue eating its meal. Pa! There was a muffled sound as Bai Lian threw a moderate-sized rock at Atu. The rock bounced a few times on the grass in the courtyard and rolled for a while before stopping not far from Atu's head. Atu was startled and his body shrank back a little. He then immediately bared his teeth at White Lotus and made a fierce face. It looked as if he was saying, "If you provoke me again, don't blame me for eating you up." To be honest, when paired with his ridiculously tall body, it really was a little scary. However, White Lotus obviously didn't have much fear of this black dog. She just waved her hand indifferently, then pointed at the stone on the ground and said, don't rush, look at that thing. Roar. Atsu stared at White Lotus warily. After a while, its pair of dog eyes glanced down. It saw that the stone on the ground was about the size of a palm. One side was flat, but the other side was uneven and full of potholes. At this moment, the flat side was upside down on the ground, and it looked like it was dug out from somewhere. Atsu took a few glances and found nothing unusual. Just when it was about to raise its head and get angry at White Lotus, it saw that White Lotus waved her hand impatiently and said, turn it over, turn it over. Atsu hesitated for a moment, stretched out a dog paw to lift the stone, and turned it over. Suddenly, its eyes focused on the stone, and for a moment, it couldn't move its eyes away. From a moment it turned the stone over, White Lotus had been staring at Atsu's expression. At this moment, she finally showed a happy expression. She couldn't help but gently clench her fist, took 2 steps forward, and said, how is it? Does it look familiar? Atsu stared at the stone without saying a word. On the flat side of the stone, there was a complicated and twisted strange picture. The pattern seemed to be somewhat similar to the totem of the barbarians in the far south. White Lotus squatted down not far in front of it. Atsu raised its head and looked at her with a puzzled expression. White Lotus pointed at the stone and said to Atsu, I dug this thing out from the wall of a place. Well, although it is an ancient relic, who cares? As long as I am happy, it is fine. You're interested in this thing, right? Isn't the secret method of blood feeding something from the barbarians? Atsu was silent for a moment and suddenly whispered twice. It didn't sound like there was any hostility anymore. White Lotus smiled, seemed to be very satisfied and also a little proud. She even stretched out her hand to try to touch Atsu's head. Atsu dodged, but in the end, it didn't retreat. White Lotus nodded and said, well, since you're also interested in these things, let's go and have a look together. And she stood up, and her eyes flashed slightly. She whispered, also help me to carefully search for the secret in that hole. Chapter 424. Do you think we'll alert the enemy this time? Old Ma asked Lu Chun. Lu Chun looked at him and said, what do you mean? The butcher who escaped. Old Ma said, we went there, but we didn't catch him. Instead, we let him escape. Until now, we still don't know where he is. If that guy really has something to do with the Devil Sect, it'll be difficult. Lu Chun was silent for a while, then said, it's also possible that he has nothing to do with the Devil Sect. At least, I carefully searched the meat shop inside and out and didn't find anything related to the Devil Sect. Old Ma said, could it be that he's also a veteran, so everything is very clean and secretive? Lu Chun shook his head slightly and didn't answer his question. Instead, he changed the topic and said, it's that Song Wenji's fault. If she didn't suddenly interfere and I was the one who set it up, the two of us would have worked together, and that person wouldn't have been able to escape. Old Ma shrugged his shoulders and didn't say anything. Lu Chun said, how's the hunting for the butcher going? Old Ma said, I've already told the situation to Fuyunji. Hall leader Shuiying has also ordered to track down that person. With their strength, it's still possible to catch that guy. Lu Chun nodded and said, that's good. As they spoke, they had already passed the long street and turned into a relatively quiet street. Finally, they stopped in front of a very ordinary-looking tavern. One is a gardener, the other is a butcher. What is this person now? Old Ma looked at the tavern with some emotion, and his expression was somewhat complicated. Perhaps he was thinking of a tavern like this a long time ago. A chef, Lu Chun said to him, and then stepped into the tavern. After thousands of years of development, Zheng Xiaming had already occupied the peak of the human cultivation world in the vast land of the Divine Land, and had stayed there for a long time. As everyone knew, there was never a selfless saint in the world. Even if there was, it was a legend that lived in people's imagination, passed down from generation to generation, respected by everyone, and no one would learn it. Even if there was a Huashan deity whose cultivation was unbelievably high, and many people in the world regarded them as immortals, in the end, they were just people. The true immortal alliance ruled the cultivation world half in the light and half in the dark. Naturally, there were unimaginably huge benefits. Therefore, there were also countless people fighting in the true immortal alliance, both in the light and in the dark. Thus, there were countless large and small factions. However, in the cultivation world, the strong were respected. All the factions, in the end, the most prominent one was still the mountain forces led by the 6 Huashan deity cultivators. Among the big and small mountain forces in Zhengxiaming, the Starry Hall was a very aloof, or it could be said that it was a very low-key faction. Basically, in most of the conflicts for interests in Zhengxiaming, people from the Starry Hall faction could not be seen. A long time ago in ancient times, this would probably be praised as a kind of sage-like and immortal style. But in this era where all living beings were bustling with activity, who didn't want fame and who didn't want profit? So the Starry Hall, which was once prominent in the early years, was now no longer as glorious as it was in the past. But in any case, no matter how low-key it was, there was still a Guyu deity in the Starry Hall. Such a strong person was enough to be respected. So people did not say the word low-key. When mentioning the Starry Hall, it was said that people in this place were obsessed with cultivation and were very detached from the interests of mortals. It was just that after being low-key or aloof for so many years, recently the Starry Hall suddenly made a move, which shocked many people in the Immortal Allies. After so many years, the 6 Huashan deity cultivators of Zhengxiaming were actually invited to a gathering from this place, which was really unexpected. There is almost no one in the world who would not give face to a Huashan deity cultivator. The only person who had the confidence to do so was probably also a Huashan deity cultivator. But on this day, it was clear that the other 5 Huashan deity cultivators of Zhengxiaming were very respectful to the Guyu deity cultivator of the Starry Hall. They all put down the important things at hand and the trivial things that piled up like a mountain, and found time to come to the Starry Hall. The Starry Hall was an unusually majestic and spacious hall. It looked even taller than a small hill. In addition to its majestic appearance, there was a dazzling star map engraved on the dome of the Starry Hall, which was filled with countless stars. Every time night came, the lights in the hall would be extinguished, and the stars carved with strange gems would light up one by one, decorating the hall with light, and it was very beautiful. This was a very famous wonder in the main hall of Zhengxiaming, but it was very difficult for ordinary people to see, even for Huashan deity cultivators. Because of their status, they usually would not come here, so in fact they had not seen it many times. Needless to say, when they came this time, it was in the daytime. When the 6 great Huashan deity cultivators gathered to discuss matters, all the disciples, servants of the Starry Hall were chased out, and all the attendants and disciples brought by the other 5 Huashan deity cultivators were also told to wait outside the hall. In the entire huge hall, only the 6 of them remained inside. Unlike most people's imaginations of the gathering of the 6 great Huashan deity cultivators, the sky changing color and thunder and lightning, the 6 great figures who came to the Starry Hall at this moment were not dressed solemnly, and their faces were cold. They were each sitting on a high chair like gods looking down on the world from high above. On the contrary, the 6 people in the hall were directly sitting on the ground under the starry dome, and the way they sat was also very casual. Some were half lying and half lying. Some had their hands on a book, some were yawning, and some even had their eyebrows drooped as if they had fallen asleep again. The master of the Starry Hall, Guyu deity, was an old man with white hair and a ruddy complexion. He had gathered these great figures who were earth-shattering in the outside world, but at this moment he did not say a word and kept looking up at the dome of the hall, staring blankly, without any intention of speaking at all. After a long while, in the end, it was the most straightforward Tehu deity of the Heavenly Law Hall who could not help but glare at Guyu deity and said in a low, muffled voice, "Guyu, you have been looking at this star-moon yin-yang diagram for more than 100 years, did you specially ask us old men to come and look at it with you today? You have all seen this diagram, right? Guyu deity retracted his gaze. Looking dazed, it did not even look like an expression that a person of his level would have. He paused, and then said, "Can you see anything strange?" He said this somewhat slowly, but his words were clearly not joking. After hearing this, the expressions of the few deities at the side changed slightly, and then they all looked up. Although most people had seen this picture a long, long time ago, they were deity transformation stage perfected monarchs. They were like gods, so they naturally had their own advantages. No matter how old the memory was, it shouldn't be difficult for them. After a while, the eye-catching bald true Lord Tianlan, who was sitting beside true Lord Tiehu, suddenly rubbed his big head and said with a smile, "This lousy map is still as ugly as before." I can't tell. The perfected lords next to him also shook their heads. Perfected Lord Tiehu snorted coldly and said, "This magic treasure is the most precious treasure of your starry hall. Apart from you, probably no one else can see the secret hidden in it." Guyu deity was still looking up, and there was no change in his expression. After a while, he suddenly took a deep breath and then said, "That moon is about to appear." Chapter 425. When Bai Lian jumped down from the high wall, she only heard a gust of wind sweep past. Another huge shadow had already landed behind her. Moreover, it was silent, as light as a falling leaf. She looked back and saw the black dog's terrifying eyes coldly looking at her from behind. The beautiful girl in white smiled and said to the huge demonic beast, "Not bad. You're much stronger than when I saw you in Kunlun Mountain a few years ago." Atsu stared at her for a moment, then looked away without saying a word and began to look around the messy courtyard. It was still daytime, and in order to get Atsu to come here from the alley of Horse-Washing Bridge, White Lotus had really put in a lot of effort. For example, there was a very spacious, ordinary-looking carriage parked far away on the long street outside. "Do you know, Atsu?" White Lotus turned around and walked towards the peach tree that was still in full bloom. At the same time, she said, "I don't like those soul formation true monarchs at all." Atsu's footsteps paused for a moment, then it walked forward again. It didn't seem to have much of a reaction, and it wasn't wrong to say that it was indifferent, even though soul formation true monarchs had an incomparably high status in the human cultivation world. In front of this dog, White Lotus seemed to be a lot more talkative than usual. It was probably because Atsu couldn't speak, so she could only talk to herself, or perhaps there were some things she kept in her heart that she never had anyone to say. Right now, speaking freely to this dog that couldn't speak was more reliable than speaking to most people. Most of the cultivators in the world can only see one soul formation true monarch in their lifetime, so they all worship and respect these people as gods. But I'm different. White Lotus waved her hand at Atsu, indicating it to follow her, then turned around and walked forward. At the same time, she continued, "I've seen more than one, and I've seen them all day long. Looking at them makes me tired. I don't like my master. The one who died. He took me in as a disciple because he valued my talent, but I've been under his tutelage for so long, but from start to finish, I've never seen him smile at me once. Not even once. Do you know how it feels to face a person who is as cold as ice all day? Martial Uncle Tianlan is good to me. He often smiles at me. He also takes me to many people and treats me gently. His kindness and magnanimity almost move people in Kunlun to tears." White Lotus stopped, looked at Atsu, and said, "But do you know at that time, I was the only one in the world who could see what was hidden in his eyes. That bald man's eyes were just like you. A bloodthirsty and carnivorous demon beast. No, he was 10 times colder than you. I don't know why he kept me alive." White Lotus said, "In fact, what Lu Chun said that day was very right. After I went back and thought about it, I felt that it was very reasonable. Because if it were me, I would also find a way to kill the rebellious disciple left by my former senior brother." The girl pursed her lips, looking a little annoyed and a little helpless. It was almost difficult for her to show such emotions in front of outsiders. But soon, She calmed down and looked at her feet. The dark hole was just a foot ahead. "Here we are. Let's go down and have a look." White Lotus smiled, like the delicate peach blossom on her head, and said to Atsu. The flame on the torch burned brightly, illuminating the surrounding darkness. White Lotus held the torch she brought and carefully walked in the underground passage of the ruins of the ancient ruins. She came here once not long ago, and at that time, there was a man named Lu Chun with her. The surroundings did not seem to have changed at all. Everything was hidden in the darkness, and after being illuminated by the fire, its original appearance was revealed. However, there was nothing strange in the dilapidated walls, even the strange patterns that appeared on the walls later. But for some reason, White Lotus felt that this place seemed to be a little different from the last time she came here. She couldn't tell what was different, but she could clearly distinguish that the feeling in her heart was completely different from the last time she came here. The last time she was very quiet and calm, but this time, after entering this underground, she subconsciously became nervous. Under the calm smile, she vaguely felt that her heart seemed to be slowly beating faster. The surroundings were still so dark. She seemed to have sensed something. Is it fear? She was alone in this darkness, but she actually felt a kind of fear and terror. But why? The last time she came here with Lu Chun, she didn't feel this kind of feeling. And looking at Lu Chun, he seemed to be completely unaffected by this kind of emotion. People in this world, as long as they are normal, they will be afraid of the dark. White Lotus suddenly said to herself, then turned her head and said to Atsu, who had been following behind her, "Don't you think so, Atsu?" Her voice suddenly became low, and at that moment, she saw just behind her the huge and strong black dog that seemed to be one with the darkness. It seemed to always prefer to walk in the dark, rather than stand in the light of the torch. Although its every step followed her, there was a boundary between light and darkness. But all this was not important, because at that moment, White Lotus suddenly saw Atsu's eyes. It was a pair of strange green pupils that suddenly turned up in the darkness, and there was a cold luster flashing through the eyes, as if death was hidden in them. The black figure stopped in the darkness and then stared at her. After a while, White Lotus whispered, "Your eyes are very beautiful, Atsu." Atsu stood still. White Lotus looked at it and asked again, "Does Lu Chun know?" This time, Atsu seemed to be a little hesitant. After a while, it stepped forward, walked past White Lotus, and walked towards the depths of the passage ahead. White Lotus looked at its figure, and a complicated look flashed in her eyes. After a while, she also followed. The wall of rubble that blocked the road slowly appeared in front of them under the illumination of the torches. Just like the last time White Lotus came here, it was tightly sealed, and there was no gap to peep into the inside of the ruins. White Lotus looked around, and after a moment of silence, she still held the torch and began to carefully search around, probably to see if she could find anything that she had missed. Atsu stood in the dim passage, and a pair of huge dog eyes kept staring at the wall. It slowly raised its head, looking from top to bottom and from left to right. At this time, White Lotus, who was busy next to the passage, said from afar, "Atsu, look around and see if there is something wrong here. If you can really find it, I will treat you to a big meal." Atsu didn't even look at her. It just stared at the rubble wall that seemed to be piled up like a mountain. After a long time, it suddenly slowly walked forward and walked to one of the corners. At that moment, in the depths of its strange pupils, under the strange green light, there was suddenly a touch of black flame suddenly flashed. Atsu stretched out a claw of his forelimb, and tentatively, he slowly touched the wall. It was an inconspicuous place in the rubble wall. It looked like a broken pillar, flat and round like a plate. Its paw slowly touched it, and then gently patted it. Chapter 426. The taste of this dish is too good. It seemed to be not bad. Lu Chun looked at Old Ma with slight disdain and sneered, "It's not just not bad. Now, I finally know why your pub business in King Shitang village has been so bad for the past 10 years. The wine is terrible. The food is terrible. The only thing you can bring out is a bowl of boiled noodles." No one knows if I'm the only one who has eaten it in the past 10 years. Old Ma said angrily. Nonsense. The pub business is bad. Of course it's because of the small and poor village. It has nothing to do with my cooking. Even if I get the best immortal wine in this immortal city, can anyone in that village afford it? Lu Chan curled his lips, looking disdainful, and said, Anyway, I think this chef is a real businessman. Old Ma spat, then said, What kind of business is this? I think this person looks like a traitor. Maybe he's a sorcerer from the devil cult. Lu Chan laughed and said, You're so unreasonable. You're slandering him as a member of the devil cult just because his cooking isn't as good? Old Ma turned his head to look at the kitchen at the back of the pub. There was a curtain hanging there, blocking the scene inside, the layout of which was the same as most restaurants. After a while, Old Ma said, I'm just saying it casually. It's not like I'm going to arrest him immediately. Besides, this person is one of the people on the list, so he's very suspicious. Lu Chan shook his head and said, You can't say that. The first 2 times, the gardener and the butcher died, and one escaped. We didn't find any more evidence to prove that they were sorcerers from the devil cult, so we can't be sure if the 3rd chef is from the devil cult. Old Ma raised his head and drank a mouthful of wine. He clicked his tongue and suddenly lowered his voice to say to Lu Chan, Why do I feel that something is wrong with this matter? I can ignore the others, but this list really doesn't feel right. Lu Chan frowned but didn't say anything. Old Ma looked at his expression and his eyes suddenly lit up. You think so too, right? It's a little strange, and the people on the list are all in the Immortal City. With Fiyunji's past abilities, it shouldn't be difficult to find them. Why would the 2 of us be assigned to investigate? After Lu Chan finished speaking, he was silent for a while, as if he was thinking about something. After a while, he looked up at Old Ma and said, Forget it, don't think so much. Let's go back and see the chef. All right. Old Ma nodded and drank the wine in his cup. On Mount Celestial Dragon in Zhengxianming, the gathering of the 6 divine transformation stage supremes, which attracted the attention of the world, actually ended much faster than most people expected. When they entered the hall, there were 6 figures, but when they walked out, there were only 5. The only one who didn't follow them out was the master of the Star Hall, Guyu. Many people waiting in the distance saw the 5 figures in front of the hall, and there was an immediate uproar in the crowd. However, perhaps out of respect for these big shots who occupied the peak of the human cultivation world, the others didn't run forward for the time being. In front of the hall, 5 deity transformation stage perfected monarchs stood side by side with different expressions on their faces. There was almost no interaction or greeting between them, and no one else could tell what had happened in the hall from the expressions on their faces. I heard that our immortal allies has been flourishing recently, and there are many strange people competing to join us. The first to speak was Immortal Tiehu. His usually stern and cold voice sounded like a knife, making people feel uncomfortable. Am I right, Tianlan? After this last sentence was asked, the originally calm front of the Star Hall suddenly became dead silent. The other 3 divine transformation stage supremes all looked at Immortal Tiehu, and after a while, they all looked at Immortal Tianlan, who was standing not far from Immortal Tiehu. Immortal Tianlan smiled very gently and politely, and even looked a little embarrassed. He used his hand to gently touch his unusually bright bald head. Indeed, it is all thanks to the hard work of the Supremes that our Zhengxianming can have today's situation. Only then can we win the hearts of the world. The Supremes next to him nodded slightly, obviously not repulsed by Immortal Tianlan's flattery. From this, it could also be seen that people who were high and mighty like the Divine Transformation Stage Supremes had long lost interest in all kinds of flattery. However, based on the current situation, it should be to distinguish who the flatterer was, and what was the identity of the flatterer. Immortal Tiehu smiled coldly, looked at Immortal Tianlan with some arrogance, and directly walked down the stone steps. Suddenly, many people rushed out from the crowd in the distance, crowded around him, and quickly left. The expressions of the other 3 divine transformation stage perfected lords changed slightly, but they quickly returned to normal. None of them spoke to perfected Lord Tianlan, and after nodding politely, They had no intention of getting involved in this matter and went their separate ways. Soon, perfected Lord Tianlan was the only one left in front of the Starry Palace. However, his expression still looked very calm, and there was also a smile on his face, as if nothing had happened just now. However, when he occasionally looked back at the Star Hall, there seemed to be a hint of worry in the depths of his eyes. The blood moon that has not been seen for 1,000 years. He whispered to himself, and seemed to swallow the words after that. No one could hear him more clearly. White Lotus carefully searched the nearby passageways with a torch, but in the end, she found nothing, just like when Lu Qian was here that day. She seemed to be a little unhappy, and muttered, "Could it be that all the good things have been taken away by him?" However, as she said that, she shook her head, probably thinking that it was more likely that there was actually no secret here. Otherwise, with her and Lu Qian's abilities, it was impossible that they could not find anything. However, the situation today was a little different because apart from herself, there was also a huge black dog. White Lotus turned around and walked towards Atsu, and at the same time said, "Atsu, have you looked around here, including the black runes on the wall? Is there anything?" Halfway through her sentence, she suddenly stopped and frowned at the same time. This was because in her vision, the black dog did not sniff around the surrounding ground to look for secrets, nor did it lie on the two sides of the passageway to carefully look at the remnant rune patterns on the wall. From the beginning until now, Atsu only stood in one place, under the wall of rubble. Its pair of eyes stared fixedly at the stone, green light flashing and darkness surging. After an unknown period of time, a red light suddenly reflected in White Lotus's clear eyes. A strange shadow slowly appeared on the strange round stone in front of Atsu. It looked a little round and a little blurry, but most importantly, the shadow was not black, but red with a strong aura. Blood red. It was a blood red moon. Chapter 427. What's going on with Fiyunji? There's something wrong with the name list they gave us. As they walked out of the tavern, Old Ma lowered his voice and complained to Lu Qian. "What's wrong with that chef? Isn't he just an ordinary person who works honestly? He doesn't have any cultivation or magic power. How could he be related to the evil sect?" Lu Qian also looked a little puzzled, frowning slightly. After a while he said, "That name list was given to me by that damn Baldy himself. Fiyunji wouldn't dare to deceive him. Maybe we've made a mistake. What secret did that chef have that we didn't notice?" Old Ma snorted and said, "What secret place is it? Tell me." Lu Qian smiled bitterly and said, "Didn't I say that I might not have noticed? But that shouldn't be the case. It's one thing to deceive me, but you've been in this line of work for decades. You have a wealth of experience and unique insight. There's no way I can fool you." Old Ma's expression changed. He almost laughed out loud. Then he coughed dryly, nodded and said seriously, "What you said is very reasonable." Lu Qian sent a flying kick at him. Old Ma smiled and moved out of the way. Then he walked up to Lu Qian and said, "The Floating Clouds office must have found something suspicious about the people on this list, but they haven't confirmed it yet. That's why they sent it to us through the True Sovereign. I think they wouldn't deliberately deceive True Monarch, but what exactly did they find? They didn't tell us at all, causing us to have to start from the beginning. This is not right." Lu Qian pondered for a moment, suddenly looked at Old Ma, said, "Did you offend that Shuang Hall leader recently?" Old Ma's face stiffened, said, "Don't talk nonsense with my identity. How would I dare to offend that person?" Lu Qian said, "I think maybe that person is purposely giving us a difficult problem to test us." Old Ma rolled his eyes, said, "I'm just a small fry. How could Shuang like me? I think this thing is aimed at you." Lu Qian snorted, said, "Why is it aimed at me?" Old Ma laughed. "Don't play dumb. She's a hall leader of Fiyunji. Even in Zengxiaming, she can do whatever she wants except for those true monarchs. What is there to be afraid of?" Lu Qian looked at Old Ma. Old Ma smiled faintly. After a while, Lu Qian suddenly sighed and said, let's go back." With that, he walked forward. Old Ma followed and asked him hesitantly, "Then what about the chef today?" Lu Qian thought for a while and said, "Come early tomorrow. Secretly follow him and observe for a while. See if there's anything strange. If there's still nothing, then replace him. Olma nodded, then said as if thinking, actually, I have a feeling that this chef might really be Fiyunji's people being suspicious. Look at the chef's skills today, and his knife skills when he was in the kitchen, cutting meat and vegetables so skillfully, it's obvious that he's been working as a chef all his life. There's no problem. Lu Chen laughed coldly, said, what you said, it's all your own imagination. If you really want to put it this way, if you say his knife skills are good, I'll say it's knife skills. Cutting meat fast? Maybe it's because he cut too much human meat. Hey, old Ma said angrily, I just came out from that pub. Don't talk nonsense. I was so scared that I almost vomited. Lu Chen laughed and reached out to pat old Ma's shoulder, then suddenly said with some emotion, but today is also a little unexpected. What? I didn't see that Song Wenji. If she also has that list, shouldn't she also come? Strange. On Mount Tianlong, in the Hall of Heavenly Law, this time it was not in the solemn main hall of the Hall of Heavenly Law, but in another secluded room. However, the people were still the same. It was still Immortal Tiehu and his adopted daughter Song Wenji. Perhaps because this was a more private place, Taihu Supreme was much more relaxed. He was wearing a soft and comfortable nightgown and was half lying on a large reclining chair. One of his hands was placed flat on his side, while the other was holding a crystal-clear jade cup. Inside the cup was an unknown but strangely blood-red wine. From time to time, he would bring it to his mouth and take a sip, after which his face would reveal a satisfied expression. This seemed to be a comfortable life of an immortal, especially the charming Song Wenji, who was kneeling on the ground beside his thighs. With a smile on her face, her cheeks slightly red, she looked really beautiful, like a peach, and stretched out her hands to gently massage his thighs. After a while, Song Wenji smiled and said, Father, do you feel better? True Monarch Tai, who opened his eyes and said with a doting smile, Much better, much better. Thanks to you, my old bones can finally enjoy a good time. Song Wenji burst out laughing and said, Look at you. You are one of the 6 great immortals of Zhengxianming. You can call the wind and summon the rain in the cultivation world of the entire divine land. But now you make it sound so pitiful. Immortal Tiehu sighed, stretched out his hand, and gently patted Song Wenji's hand, then sat up and motioned for her to sit beside him. Song Wenji stood up and dragged a round stool from the side, and sat beside Immortal Tiehu, then obediently placed his free hand on her thighs and gently massaged him, looking really filial. Immortal Tiehu's eyes were full of love, and he looked very satisfied. He even stretched out one of his hands and grabbed Song Wenji's plump thighs, then sighed and said, It's all an undeserved reputation. Look at how high and mighty I have been all these years. Almost everyone in the world looks at me the same way. And here at Heavenly Law Hall, for many years, I could only maintain a righteous aura and be solemn and self-restrained. Even the slightest mistake would cause all kinds of gossip. In fact, I have been cultivating all my life, and when I was young, I wholeheartedly worked for the world's righteousness, and for the dignity of Heavenly Law Hall, I worked myself to death. Now that I think about it, it's really a great injustice. Song Wenji's hands slightly paused, and her head slightly drooped down, making it difficult for others to see her expression. But then she softly said, How can that be? Everyone in the world, including Zhengxianming, respects you very much. Immortal Tiehu snorted, with a disdainful look in his eyes. His withered palm gently stroked Song Wenji's thighs, and at the same time said, I have finally seen through them. Those people only want me to be a saint, but they are sanctimonious and seek pleasure every day. Damn it. As he spoke, he glanced at Song Wenji with a smile on his face and said, Fortunately, my luck is not bad, and I can still meet you in my old age. I have no regrets in my old age. Song Wenji glanced at him with a faint smile and said, Foster father, if you talk nonsense again, I will be angry. Immortal Tiehu laughed and waved his hand, saying, all right, I know you are thin-skinned, then I won't say any more. Song Wenji smiled and then seemed to think of something and said, "Foster father, there is something I want to ask you. Why don't you let me continue to look for the people on the list?" Immortal Tiehu said lightly, "Give Tianlon some face. Not long ago, I made him lose face. In this matter, if you follow too closely, it will be too much of a loss if someone in Fuyunji secretly plots against you." Song Wenji was startled and said, "With Immortal Tianlon's identity, he won't make things difficult for a little girl like me, right?" Immortal Tiehu took a sip of the strange blood-red wine in the cup, slightly narrowed his eyes, and said, "Generally speaking, people like Immortals will naturally be proud of their identity. But this person, Tianlon..." He was silent for a moment, and then continued, "In the past 10 years, the world has been peaceful in the whole Zhengxianming. Only his Fuyunji has always been fighting with the devil cult, both openly and secretly, so there have been countless casualties. This person is also the most murderous immortal of Huashan realm in the Immortal Allies for hundreds of years." His white eyebrows slightly wrinkled, and said, "It is not that I am afraid of him, but it is better to be cautious with this person." Chapter 428. Lu Chen sat in the yard and looked at the black dog lying by his feet. He frowned and seemed to be thinking about something. Old Ma, who was next to him, felt strange and asked, "What's wrong? Is there anything strange about this dog?" Lu Chen hesitated and seemed to be unsure. He said, "Not really. I just feel that it is a little listless today." Old Ma was stunned and said, "I remember that Atsu is like this at this time. Anyway, it is either eating or sleeping. Is it because it wants to sleep because it is getting dark?" Lu Chen pondered for a moment, seemingly disapproving. Just as he was about to speak, the two of them suddenly heard a series of knocks coming from the gate in the distance. Clap, clap. The sound of clapping was particularly clear in the quiet surroundings. Old Ma and Lu Chen looked at each other and saw the doubt in each other's eyes, as well as a trace of vigilance that seemed to come from instinct. After a moment, Old Ma said in a low voice, "Only Fuyunji knows about this place. Did they send someone here? Or did you come here yourself?" Lu Chen simply shook his head and said, "It can't be that damn Baldy. Trust me, if he came here, he would either appear soundlessly in this courtyard, or the four walls of this place would have been crushed before he could come here." Old Ma didn't seem to have any objections to Lu Chen's judgment. At the same time, he muttered, "That makes sense. Moreover, it shouldn't be someone from the Floating Clouds Agency. I just want to look for them not too long ago." He paused for a moment before standing up and saying, "Forget it, I'll go take a look." Lu Chen nodded and said, "Be careful." Old Ma smiled and said, "Don't worry." Then he turned around and walked towards the gate. Lu Chen lowered his head and touched Atsu's head. Atsu looked up at him, and his eyes flickered. Lu Chen said in a low voice, "What's the matter?" Atsu turned its head and seemed to have some reaction. Suddenly, a confused voice came from the gate. After a while, the sound of footsteps was heard. It was Old Ma, who came back with a strange look on his face. There was a figure behind him. Delicate face and elegant temperament. It was White Lotus. Lu Chen furrowed his brows as he stood up. The usually lazy Atu also stood up without a word and stared at Bai Lian with a strange look in his eyes. "Why are you here?" Lu Chen asked. White Lotus was not angry at Lu Chen's cold question. It seemed that she had completely forgotten about the conflict with Lu Chen in the butcher's shop a few days ago. At this moment, White Lotus was all smiles. She did not look like a mortal. She nodded to Lu Chen and said, "We meet again." Lu Chen looked at Old Ma with a trace of doubt in his eyes. Old Ma smiled bitterly and walked to his side. He said, "She said that she will come to help us track down the evil cult. This time she came with the approval of true Lord Tianlon. There is also a handwritten letter as proof." Even Lu Chen, who was usually calm, was stunned at this moment. He asked in astonishment, "What?" Old Ma sighed, took out a letter from his bosom, and handed it to Lu Chen. He said, "Although I don't know how she got this letter is indeed written by true Lord Tianlon. I can recognize it. It can't be wrong." Lu Chen's face was gloomy. He took out the letter and read it from beginning to end. Then he snorted and said in a low voice, "What the hell is this damn Baldy doing? He has to make trouble for us." Old Ma coughed and said, "Be careful with your words. She is still here." At this time, White Lotus smiled and said, "Are you two men done talking? Why are you whispering like a little girl?" Lu Chun and Old Ma turned to look at her together. After a while, Lu Chun frowned and said, "This has nothing to do with you, and it may be dangerous. You really don't have to get involved." Bao Yin's face turned solemn as she said, "Now that I've been cultivating with martial uncle Tianlan, I've received his teachings and understand that cultivation is for the sake of righteousness and for the sake of the common people. That's why I've come to ask martial uncle Tianlan to lend you a hand." Lu Chun and Old Ma were both stunned and then looked at each other. After a while, Lu Chun sighed and said, "Well, now I believe that you've been cultivating with that damn baldy. What's the matter with that damn baldy? How could he throw this little ancestor here?" In the bedroom, Lu Chun complained to Old Ma. Old Ma was also puzzled and pondered. Could it be that Senior Jinjuan has some kind of far-reaching plan? Is he playing a big game of chess? Bullshit. Lu Chun interrupted him rudely and sneered. "The most annoying people are those who have not done anything but say that they are playing a big game of chess to save face. Tell me, what's the benefit of letting White Lotus stay with us?" Obviously, Old Ma could not figure out the reason, so he had to smooth things over and said, Forget it. It's not that urgent. Calm down. After tomorrow morning, I will go to Mount Tianlong and find an opportunity to see Immortal and see what is going on." Lu Chun shook his head and said to himself, "I don't think it's useful. That damn baldy will hide his thoughts in his heart and won't tell you." Old Ma laughed and said, "It doesn't matter. It's just a trip. Well, it's getting late. You should rest early." As he said this, he walked to the door and opened it. Suddenly, he heard a cry of surprise. His body stiffened, and then he jumped back reflexively. Lu Chun and Black Dog were also startled. They stood up and turned their heads to look. They saw a figure standing at the door. In the dark night, that white face looked a little scary, although it was still very beautiful. It was White Lotus. Old Ma seemed to be quite frightened. He patted his chest and said in surprise, "Little lady, what are you doing standing here in the middle of the night?" White Lotus smiled and said, "I'm here to bring you something." "Huh?" The two people in the room were both surprised. Old Ma said in surprise, "Something for me? What is it?" White Lotus reached out and pulled a big package from the side. Without saying a word, she pushed it into Old Ma's arms. Old Ma hesitated for a moment and opened it. Suddenly, his face changed. He jumped up and shouted, Isn't this my bedding and luggage?" "Yes." White Lotus smiled and said, "I packed it for you and brought it here for you. Not bad, right? You don't have to thank me." "Thank you." Old Ma was angry and shouted, "What do you mean? It's all what I mean is that bedroom belongs to me. You can't be delusional enough to cohabit with a girl like me, right? You." Old Ma was so angry that he was speechless. For a moment, he didn't know what to say. When he turned around, he saw that Lu Chun was smiling gloatingly at his misfortune. He immediately became even angrier. Turning around, he yelled at Bao Yin, "There are 2 rooms here. Why did you only take mine and not Lu Chen's?" White Lotus glanced at Lu Chun and then said, "Martial Uncle Tianlan asked me to pick up this person. In addition, he often said damn baldy from time to time, but he is still alive and well today. It shows that he must have a backer. Why would I provoke him?" Old Ma was so angry that he shouted, "So you think I'm a small fry? So you provoke me?" White Lotus glanced at him and then nodded and said, "Yes, if I provoke you, what will you do?" After saying that, she turned and left. There was silence in the bedroom, and the atmosphere suddenly became awkward. Lu Chun and Old Ma looked at each other. After a while, Old Ma suddenly laughed and said, "It seems that I really can't do anything." Chapter 429. Early in the morning, White Lotus woke up early. The night had just passed, and the day had just begun to dawn. It was a quiet and cold time. She lay on the warm bed for a while, then put on her clothes, opened the door, and walked out. The courtyard was quiet. The tender green grass still had dewdrops. A few breezes quietly passed by, passing through the treetops, gently swaying the branches. A person was standing in the middle of the courtyard, hands behind his back, looking up at the sky. Perhaps hearing the sound, he turned around to look. It was Lu Chun. Their eyes met, stared at each other for a moment. Lu Chun nodded, said, "Morning, morning." White Lotus pulled the cloak on her shoulders a little tighter, seemed to feel a little cold, walked over, said, "Do you usually wake up this early?" Lu Chun said, "No, it's only today." White Lotus was a little puzzled, said, "Why?" Lu Chun said, "Because I didn't know before old Ma's snores were so loud. I didn't sleep well the whole night." White Lotus burst out laughing, as if it was the most innocent and beautiful smile of her age. She gently covered her mouth with her hand, said with a smile, "Did he sleep in your room last night?" "Yes." Lu Chun nodded, said, "Originally, I didn't want to. In the end, he didn't want to leave, so I had to let him sleep on the floor." White Lotus smiled, looked him up and down, suddenly said, "I haven't seen you for a few years. I always feel that you seem to have changed a lot compared to the time in Kunlun Mountain." Lu Chun asked, "What about you? Now in front of other people outside. Do you still pretend like that?" White Lotus smiled. "I didn't pretend. I have always been like that." Lu Chun gave her a deep look and said, "Back then, when you tried to kill me, you were fierce and cruel. You weren't like this today." White Lotus didn't mind and said, "At that time, I was only protecting myself. Otherwise, if there was a slight mistake, I would have been another one of your people who died silently." The two of them looked at each other for a while before looking away. There are many different kinds of people in this world. Some lived easier lives, some carried more burdens on their backs, and some had a part of their bodies that seemed to be naturally immersed in darkness, carrying secrets that no one knew about, just like shadows. Whether it was Lu Chun or White Lotus, neither of them had any intention of asking each other about those secrets. It was as if those things had never existed in the first place. Lu Chun just said to White Lotus in a very calm tone, "I can't figure out why you suddenly came to interfere in this matter. It should have nothing to do with you, and I'm not very willing to do things with you." White Lotus nodded, not angry, but also had no intention of retreating. After thinking for a while, she said, "I came here because I have a little interest in the devil cult. It has nothing to do with you." Now the devil cult is declining, and the immortal allies are dominating, especially in the immortal city where the headquarters of Zhengxiaming is located. It is almost impossible to find the trace of the devil cult. Now the only place I can think of is here. Saying this, without waiting for Lu Chun to speak, White Lotus immediately said, "Don't worry, I won't hinder you from doing things, and if there is anything I can help with, I will also help. Besides, Marshal Uncle Tianlan has promised me, no matter how big your reputation is, can you still run to ask him to take back his order?" Lu Chun secretly scolded the damn Baldy again in his heart, but there was no change on his face. Perhaps it was because she saw his unhappy expression. White Lotus suddenly smiled and said, "How about this? To show my sincerity, I can tell you another secret that I haven't made public yet." Lu Chun raised his eyebrows and turned to look at her. White Lotus smiled and said, "Not long ago, everything in Kunlun Mountain should have been settled. So from now on, my martial uncle Tianlan should officially select a large number of elites from the Kunlun party to come to the Immortal City together." Lu Chen's face changed slightly, but he did not say anything. White Lotus smiled again and said, "Maybe there are people you knew before among the people coming." Lu Chun was silent for a moment and said, "Who?" White Lotus said, "I heard that there are several Yuanying Zenrins coming, and the most outstanding masters of the younger generation under the Yuanying realm will probably be transferred here." Lu Chun glanced at her and finally asked, "What about Su Qingjun?" White Lotus smiled and said, "She will also come. For more than 10 years, the world has been peaceful, and most people in Zhengxiaming are also happy to be idle. In addition to perfected Lord Tianlan, the other 5 perfected gods of Huashan realm in Zhengxiaming, and the forces under their command, almost do not take action against the outside world. Occasionally, when something happens, they usually just report the name of Zhengxiaming, plus the name of their perfected lord, and naturally, everything goes smoothly." Old Ma leaned on the edge of the bed and said to Lu Chun, who was sitting next to him, "So for a long time, The Immortal allies have not transferred a large number of forces from the sects like this. Lu Qin said lightly, except Fuyunji. Old Ma smiled and said, yes, except Fuyunji. Over the years, Fuyunji is the only hall in Zhengxiaming that has always been fighting against the outside world and has always had a bad reputation in the Immortal allies. Old Ma said, in addition to the many shadows that have been criticized for spending a lot of money for no reason, over the years, Fuyunji's strength has always been strong, and it has become the most powerful hall in Zhengxiaming, which is also feared by others. Lu Qin's eyes flickered and said, but even so, now the damn Baldy still disregards the criticism and forcibly mobilized the elites of Kunlun Party, one of the 5 sects in the world, into the Immortal City. If these people enter Fuyunji, Old Ma shook his head and said, in fact, it doesn't matter whether they enter or not. Everyone knows that both Kunlun Party and Fuyunji now only listen to the orders of Perfected Lord. In short, in this way, at least for now, in the Immortal City, the strength of our side will soar to the sky, and we will be invincible. There was no joy on Lu Qin's face. Instead, he frowned. After a moment of silence, he said, we all understand these things, and the damn Baldy can't have not thought of it. What does he want to do? That he would actually risk offending all the other perfected lords of the divine transformation realm to do this? Old Ma said with a bitter smile, he thinks deeply. There must be something that we can't think of. Lu Qin shook his head and said, are you still going to see him today? Old Ma said, no. Since we already know that Perfected Lord agreed to let White Lotus come here, he must have his own ideas, so we don't have to be nosy. As for you here, I don't think it's a big deal. It's just one more person. Lu Qin thought for a moment and said, okay, for now. That's the only way. After that, the two chatted for a while and then walked out together. They saw that White Lotus had already packed up and was waiting in the courtyard. Seeing them come out, both sides greeted each other, and just as they were about to go out, White Lotus suddenly stopped, looked behind her, and said to Lu Qin, we keep Atsu here every day. It's quite pitiful. How about we bring it out today? Chapter 430. That day when Lu Qin, Old Ma, and White Lotus walked out of the horse-washing bridge alley, the black dog did not follow them. The reason was actually very simple. It could even be said to be the same old story. The Immortal City had issued a ban on dogs. It would be too eye-catching to have such a big dog following them. As for White Lotus's suggestion to find a spacious carriage, Lu Qin and Old Ma rejected it. This was because the place they were going to this time was no longer a secluded alley or a deserted house, but a lively street. Of course, in addition to this, Atsu itself was also a reason. After hearing White Lotus's suggestion to take it out for a stroll, Atsu did not seem to be interested at all. As usual, it held the demon beast meat that Lu Qin threw to it and gnawed on it with relish. It seemed to be very satisfied with its current life and had no intention of changing. So in the end, White Lotus had to give up on this idea. However, when she followed Lu Qin and Old Ma to the lively street and saw the tavern where the suspected chef was, Lu Qin and Old Ma looked at each other but did not walk in. Instead, they entered a tea house across the street and found a seat by the window. They ordered some tea and snacks, and actually drank tea and chatted leisurely, glancing at the tavern from time to time. White Lotus had always been a very smart girl, but she wasn't born with knowledge. She didn't understand what Lu Qin and Old Ma were doing. So she sat in the tea house for 2 hours and saw that the two men still had no intention of leaving. Finally, she couldn't help but ask the question in her mind. White Lotus had been drinking tea for 2 hours in the tea house, but the two men still had no intention of leaving. What are you two doing? Old Ma pointed at the tavern opposite and said, we went there yesterday, so we have to avoid arousing suspicion today, so we waited here. Wait for what? White Lotus asked in confusion. Old Ma said, let's wait for the chef to make a mistake. Let's see if he has any abnormal behavior or actions. If he has, we will naturally follow the clues and investigate. If not, he paused and glanced at Lu Qin. White Lotus quickly noticed Old Ma's action. She also looked at Lu Qin and asked, what if nothing happens? Lu Chun was silent for a moment, then said, "Continue to wait." White Lotus frowned and said, "How long do we have to wait? If there is no problem with that person, you can't possibly wait for a lifetime, right?" Old Ma coughed and interrupted. "That won't happen. Generally speaking, we will guard this kind of thing for half a month at most. If nothing else happens after half a month, we will usually give up on this person." White Lotus's eyes lit up slightly and said, "That means you usually only need half a month at most to investigate these people." Lu Chun, who was next to her, shook his head and said, "No." Lu Chun didn't say anything more. Old Ma continued, "Generally, when people do this kind of disguise, they will often reveal all kinds of flaws within 10 days to half a month. This is inevitable. That is why we said that at most half a month, we can see if there is anything strange about this person. However, there are exceptions to everything. In the shadow business, there are also some top figures. They have strong nerves and are very good at hiding. They do everything the way they do. You can't find anything strange about them at all." As he said this, Old Ma glanced at Lu Chun intentionally or unintentionally, but he saw that Lu Chun's face was indifferent and didn't change at all. So, Old Ma smiled and said to White Lotus, "In short, since we can't find the flaws of that person now, we will wait for a period of time to secretly monitor him. If there's really something strange, Lu Chun will naturally see it." White Lotus's eyes flickered, and she looked at Lu Chun meaningfully. Then she said, "Sure enough, there is something wrong with your identity. When we were on Kunlun Mountain, I felt that there was something wrong with you." Lu Chun smiled and said, "It's all your martial uncle's fault." The waiting time was obviously very unbearable, at least for White Lotus, who was experiencing this kind of thing for the first time. After enduring for half a day with great difficulty, she finally couldn't help but say to the two men beside her, "For such a person who may not necessarily be a spy of the evil sect, is it not worth it to waste so much time here? This kind of thing can never be rushed. Patience is more important than anything." Lu Chun replied, "And although this person is on the list, he is definitely not a big shot." White Lotus was stunned for a moment and said, "How can you be so sure?" Lu Chun smiled and didn't speak. Old Ma at the side said, "Location." He pointed to the tavern and said, "Such an ordinary tavern. Being an inconspicuous cook, he can't get any secret information about Zhengxi and Ming, and also can't be of great help to the evil sect. A spy with real identity and ability can't possibly have this kind of identity." White Lotus pondered for a moment and then nodded and said, "So there are quite a lot of tricks here. But since that's the case, why do we still? Small characters also have their uses. In a situation where we can't find the evil sect, we can follow these small characters, and maybe we can slowly follow the vines to find some bigger people." As Lu Chun spoke, he stood up and said calmly, "Let's go. Looks like that cook is going home early today." The leader of the younger generation of the Kunlun party, one of the most talented and strongest Kunlun disciples, Su Qingjun, walked into this vast and majestic immortal city without city walls at dusk. When she entered the city, she was alone, but this time there were many people from the Kunlun party who came with her to the immortal city, and they were extremely powerful. Under the leadership of several powerful Yuanying realmsgenren, the most outstanding elites of the Kunlun party almost all came from Kunlun Mountain to the immortal city. But in order not to attract attention, they separated halfway. This was also the first time Su Qingjun came to the immortal city. Perhaps it was a coincidence, from the direction she came from. When Su Qingjun walked into the immortal city and walked on the bustling streets, she looked into the distance and saw the majestic and huge statue. It felt exactly the same as Lu Chun that day. That huge statue of the white tiger divine beast, although it had weathered wind and rain and was old and mottled, but that pair of eyes seemed to have life in the silence. No matter where Su Qingjun went, she always felt that there was a pair of eyes staring at her. That white tiger divine beast, that inexplicable aura. This was the first time Su Qingjun came to the immortal city. Like Lu Chun, she was shocked by the city. Then, she strolled on the long street, and soon found that although night was about to fall and the sky was dark, The bustling scene on the streets of the Immortal City did not show any signs of subsiding. It seemed that here, even in the dark, they could still have a party. She suddenly thought of her hometown. She thought of her mother, who had not spoken to her for several years. She thought of her father, who had become taciturn after that incident. She also thought of the man she had not seen for a long time. She felt a little tired. She looked up and looked around. On the streets of this foreign land, she suddenly wanted to find a tavern to have a good drink and rest. Chapter 431. The sky was dark. Many of the shops on both sides of the street were still brightly lit. Obviously, they had no intention of closing down. On the contrary, the streets without street lamps seemed a little dim, which also made the candlelight in the taverns feel warmer. People walked on the streets as if it were daytime. But looking from the tea house, those shadowy, half-dark figures suddenly made Lu Chun feel a little strange. This bustling city, under the bright lights of the night, for some reason, was like a beautiful dream. Under the bright shadows, there were countless figures like ghosts, walking back and forth. Who knew where they came from and where they were going? Who knew what kind of ups and downs, twists and turns, and how wonderful their lives were? Everyone was walking in darkness and light all the time. At this moment, Lu Chun raised his head and drank the cup in his hand. Only then did he realize that it was tea, not wine. Suddenly, he inexplicably wanted a drink. The bored White Lotus had long lost her patience. After enduring for a long time, she finally decided to complain to the two men in front of her. "It's getting late. Why don't we go back first?" she said to the two men, who seemed to be very patient. As she said that, she seemed to think of something at the same time. She frowned and said, "Are you waiting for this tavern to close and that chef to go home? Are you going to follow him?" Old Ma said, "That's not it. That chef lives directly in the tavern. So if we really want to keep an eye on him, we actually have to send people to keep watch here at night, according to the rules." Bao Yin clearly hadn't thought that this would be the answer she'd been waiting for. A bitter look appeared on her beautiful face, but fortunately, Lu Chun spoke up at this moment. "That won't be necessary. We only have so many people. We can't waste our time like this every day. Let's call it a day." White Lotus breathed a sigh of relief. Old Ma looked at Lu Chun and did not say anything. At this moment, the three of them stood up and paid the bill. Then, they walked out of the tea house and prepared to go home. However, when he reached the end of the long street, Lu Chun stopped and said to the two of them, "You guys go back first. I'm going to walk around for a while and buy some wine later." Old Ma and White Lotus were both a little surprised. Old Ma was close to him and jokingly scolded, "Hey, you seem to be drinking more and more recently. Don't become a drunkard." Lu Chun smiled and said, "It's just a pastime." After saying that, he waved at them and turned to walk to the other end of the street. Old Ma and White Lotus looked at each other and then left. Looking at it from the tea house was different from walking on the dark streets with one's own body. The people coming and going on the streets were like all kinds of people in the world. The moment they passed by each other, they felt all kinds of strange life. It was just that the silhouette continued to flicker like a ghost. The only difference was that he was about to become one of them. Lu Chun walked on this ghostly street in silence. Unfamiliar faces filled his eyes, and there was not the slightest bit of warmth around him. Then he stopped at the door of the tea house. The dim yellow light shone through the door window and sprinkled on his body. There was laughter and people talking in the tea house. It was bustling like the human world. He stood for a while and then pushed the door open and walked in. Su Qingjun walked over from the other end of the long street. This place was very different from her hometown, Kunwa City. It was far more prosperous than her hometown. Even after dark, it was still so lively. This was something that had never happened in Kunwa City before. Su Qingjun walked in the crowd. Looking at the bright lights on both sides of the street, she felt a little familiar. She was like a bird that finally escaped from a cage. In this huge and free immortal city, she relaxed the blockage in her heart and could breathe freely. In this kind of situation, she no longer had to face that dull and silent home. She no longer had to face her parents, who were deeply hostile but cold. Every time she went back, there was a heavy sense of guilt that had been torturing her all these years. At this time, she really wanted to drink. She rarely drank before. She still remembered that the man named Lu Chun once told her about the benefits of drinking. In the open space by the cliff, he told her how good wine tasted. It could help her forget her worries, relieve her worries, indulge her emotions, and sleep peacefully. In that home, on that mountain, in that sect, she never had the chance to try it. Until today, it seemed that she really had a feeling of freedom for the first time. Su Qing-jun stopped and saw the brightly lit tea house on the side of the street in front of her. In front of her, warm lights shone through the door window. There were sounds of laughter and people flashing. She thought for a while and then walked over. "You guys are here." In a quiet hall on Mount Celestial Dragon, perfected Lord Tianlan, who had a huge body and a shiny skull, smiled and said to the people in front of him. There were several big chairs in front of him, on which sat 4 people. All of them were powerful Yuanying perfected masters from the Kunlun party. Moreover, they could be considered as trusted subordinates. Among the 5 perfected masters, Perfected Pearl was the leader. The others were Su Qingjuan's Master Masato Kahara, Perfected Master Dongfang Tao, and Perfected Master Guangyang. Perfected Pearl answered with a smile. "Senior brother Qiandeng asked me to bring you a message. After receiving your letter, he wanted to come to the Immortal City in person. Unfortunately, there are too many trivial matters in the sect. Senior brother is now a sect master and really can't leave, so he asked me to apologize to you." Perfected Lord Tianlan smiled. "That's to be expected. Don't mind it. In fact, I'm very relieved as long as you guys can come. By the way, where are the other young disciples?" Next to him, Jinren Kahara said, reporting to Marshal Uncle, "In order to avoid any trouble, the disciples who came here this time are scattered, but according to the time, they should be arriving in a few days." Perfected Lord Tianlan nodded. "Good. It's good that you're here. I can only do things freely after you guys come." The 4 Yuanying perfected masters looked at each other and said, "Just tell us what you need, Uncle Master." Lu Chun bought 2 jugs of wine from the counter of the tavern. He casually glanced at the kitchen and saw that it was the same as usual. A few cooks were chatting and laughing as they prepared the food. The innkeeper was busy doing the accounts. The inside and outside of the house seemed to be the most ordinary scene in the world. He saw the cook, but he couldn't see anything suspicious about him. Maybe he was wrong this time? He lowered his head and accepted the 2 jugs of wine from the smiling innkeeper. He paid the bill and walked out. The night was long, and the wine was enough to kill a lonely night. When he passed by the other customers in the tavern, he could see that their faces were red from the alcohol. Even their voices had become louder. But here, in the bright light of the lamps, they looked more alive, more human than the shadows in the street outside. The lively and cheerful atmosphere was around him, but seemed to be far away from him. He couldn't touch it, and he couldn't blend in. Lu Chun carried the wine, pushed open the door of the tavern, and walked out. Darkness floated outside the tavern and sprinkled down, quickly, surrounding him. He left the tavern. As he was leaving, someone walked in from the door. They brushed past each other when the light and shadow intertwined. Chapter 432. The door opened, light spilled out from the tavern, intersecting with the darkness of the street. The voices and laughter rose and fell like the tide. The figures coming and going were like ghosts, carrying their own thoughts and forgetting to take another look, brushing past each other. Faintly, there seemed to be a wisp of fragrance, faint and dark, like the twists and turns of life. He carried the wine jug, looking ahead, into the deep night, walking alone, not looking at the person beside him. That slender figure, when she pushed open the door and entered, the door swayed, the light and shadow intertwined. After a moment of time, her figure stopped at the door. Imprinted in her eyes was the lively scene of the bright lights in the room. She was deep in thought. The light shone on her face, reflecting a dazzling luster, like she was immersed in the memories of the past. She frowned slightly, as if thinking about something. After a moment, she suddenly turned and pushed open the door again. The long street was long. The tide of people surged in the darkness, like there were ghosts walking in the night. She looked up, searching for the figure that brushed past her that made her heart jump. That figure was somewhat strange, but also seemed exceptionally familiar. Lu Chun carried the wine jug and walked on the dark street, his arms swaying slightly, the wine jug in his hand also swaying, the fine wine in the jug occasionally emitting a soft sound. He walked past a few streets, and when he saw the Shima Bridge in the distance, he suddenly stopped. He looked up at the night sky. The clouds were dense. There was no starlight, causing the earth to be dark in the night. Only a unique city like the Immortal City could still shine like a jewel in such a night. He picked up a jug of wine and drank a mouthful. The fine wine rolled down his throat. There was a burning pleasure. The night wind slowly blew. He stood where he was and thought for a moment, then suddenly turned and walked in another direction. Behind him, the darkness swayed. Occasionally a figure walked by, as if there was a pair of eyes staring at his back. And after a while, a dark figure walked out from the dark street, standing at the place where Lu Chun had just stood. In the darkness, the person's face could not be seen clearly, only that she turned to look in the direction Lu Chun left and inadvertently looked back at the Shima Bridge not far away. On this night, Lu Chun was a bit like a wandering ghost, walking alone in this brightly lit city, walking on the darkest street, all the way to the butcher's shop he had come to a few days ago. The butcher called Rue Xiaotian had long escaped, and he did not know where he went. He still remembered that there was a blooming peach tree in that house, and of course, there was a dark and mysterious, but actually empty secret passage under the tree. He went around to the back of the house that had become a haunted house and jumped over the wall. When he landed, there was no sound. In the darkness of the night, the house was as cold as ever. The ground was still messy. After not seeing it for a few days, it seemed that there was an even more desolate and decadent atmosphere in the surroundings. Only the peach tree in the courtyard, even in this late night, was still in full bloom, showing vitality, and a faint fragrance floated in the night wind. Lu Chun glanced around, then went straight to the peach tree. The entrance to the secret passage under the tree was still open, dark, like a big mouth of a demon. A dark figure flew out of the night, swept over the high wall, and stared at the courtyard below for a moment, only to see only silence. The courtyard was quiet, the peach blossoms were in full bloom, and there was no one else in sight. The figure paused for a moment, then fell from the wall, like a falling leaf, quietly, blending in with the darkness, only a pair of clear and bright eyes shining like gems in the darkness. In the untended courtyard, the grass and wildflowers seemed to grow uncontrollably, some places even almost reaching the ankles, and the air was filled with a much stronger smell of grass than usual. A wind swept through the darkness, and the grass slightly rose and fell, making rustling sounds. She frowned slightly, subconsciously feeling that something was strange, so she looked around even more vigilantly, and finally her eyes fell on the most conspicuous and most beautiful peach tree in the courtyard. The peach blossoms on the tree were like snow falling in the darkness, sparkling. She slowly walked over. The surroundings were still quiet. Not a single person, not the slightest movement. There was flat ground under the tree, and a little further, it was the entrance to the dark secret passage that suddenly appeared on the ground. The person who came later stopped, looking at the secret passage, as if hesitating whether to go in or not. Another gust of night wind blew over. The peach tree trembled, and the peach blossoms on the tree swayed. It was as beautiful as a grand snowfall. She couldn't help but look up. A falling petal was reflected in her crystal-clear eyes, shining brightly. Then the sound of the wind suddenly became violent, and a black shadow suddenly pounced out, like a roaring magical beast, sweeping away all the beauty in an instant, shattering the petal. A bunch of black flames coldly and mercilessly spewed out from the darkness, chopping down towards her head. She gave a light shout and took a step back. She didn't see how she moved, but a bright and dazzling light appeared out of nowhere in her hand. It was a cloudy night with no stars or moon, But the moment she pulled out her sword, it was as if a bright moon had suddenly risen and shone into the desolate and dilapidated courtyard. The moonlight was like water, the sword essence like the cool autumn, a sword cut through the darkness, as if it instantly illuminated the surrounding darkness, broke through the cold wind, and directly faced the black fire, bringing with it an unstoppable brilliance. The sword light illuminated the man's face, somewhat cold, somewhat weathered, and also a bit of sudden surprise. The black fire in the sword light flickered. Although it was messy, it was not extinguished. The black dagger accurately found its target in the dazzling sword shadows and hit the tip of the longsword that was as bright as autumn water. Clang! A clear and melodious sound echoed in the courtyard. Two figures intertwined, and the fierce and violent power roared like a ferocious beast. It was like a wild horse that had broken free of its reins and was about to devour someone, thirsting for the taste of blood. Their faces were reflected in the light of the sword. The blades crossed, one stabbing at the chest, the other at the throat. The wind howled mournfully, but then suddenly stopped. The light suddenly brightened, and then became silent. The darkness returned. The peach tree was still swaying, countless petals falling like the last cold snow. Then the two figures stopped. In the darkness, there was the sound of quiet breathing, the sound of a gentle heartbeat in the chest, a familiar gaze, a familiar face, and a strange and cold sword against the chest and throat. Liu Chan looked at Su Qingjun, who stood quietly in front of him, who seemed to grow more beautiful in the darkness. He sighed softly and said, "So it is you." As soon as he finished speaking, he looked down and felt a coldness in front of his chest. That cold sword had pierced through his clothes and into his chest. Chapter 433. The icy edge of the sword had a bone-chilling coldness that seemed to envelop his entire heart, causing Liu Chen's body to suddenly freeze. In the darkness, the two of them stood facing each other. The sharp and bright sword seemed to be the bridge between them. The ancient sword in her hand seemed to have weathered countless years of wind and rain, but it was still shining brightly at this moment. It reflected Su Qingjuan's cold and beautiful face. Amidst the falling peach blossoms around her, it seemed like the most beautiful petal of the night. The blood was still warm. It slowly flowed out from the wound, sliding over the tip of the sword and then slowly dripping down. The blood dyed his clothes red, but it could not warm up her sword. The sword was like ice, stabbing into his chest. He should have retreated, flipped, crouched on the ground, or flown up. He should have used hidden weapons, strange moves, risked his life, and gambled. In such a dangerous situation, this man should have had dozens of ways to adapt to the situation, to struggle, to counterattack, to fight for that last chance of survival. But for some reason, after Liu Chen's body froze, he still stopped in place. His hand dropped, and the black sword also moved away from Su Qingjuan's throat. Su Qingjuan's bright and deep eyes quietly looked at him. Her hand was as steady as a boulder, her sword as bright as autumn water. She looked at his chest, looked at the blood staining his clothes. Bit by bit, it slowly spread out. He did not retreat to escape, and she did not continue forward. The night was as cold as water. They just stood there silently, facing each other, looking at each other without saying a word. This situation seemed a bit sad, but also a bit funny. It was like two children who had been good to each other, but after quarreling and getting angry, they still remembered how good the other was, but they still had to be angry and glare at each other. Because there were some things that were still hard to forget. "You killed my only brother." After an unknown amount of time, Su Qingjun finally spoke. Her voice was calm and unperturbed, but it seemed to echo in the night. It was unknown if she had said these words to herself countless times in the past few years. Liu Chen remained silent, but he didn't appear to be timid or guilty. He didn't avoid her gaze, nor did he avoid her piercing gaze. He looked at her and then nodded. The blood on his chest slowly seeped out a bit more. The corner of Su Qingjuan's lips twitched like she was gritting her teeth. Her face seemed to be covered in a layer of frost, making it hard for people to see her heart under the ice. She firmly looked at this man, looked at the blood on his chest, and asked word by word why. He deserved to die. Lu Chun did not explain, nor did he say too many words. He only used these 3 words to answer her. Su Qingjun fell silent. After a while, she spoke again. Because of Ixan? Yes. Lu Chun said, for Ixan. The 2 of them fell silent again. After a while, Su Qingjun's gaze fell on Lu Chen's right hand. That hand was still holding a black blade. Not long ago, it had been placed on her white and tender neck. In the dark night, it seemed to have restrained all of its light. Why did you put away your sword just now? She asked him. Lu Chen smiled and said in a low voice, I have already killed many people who have been good to me. I don't want you to be one more. Su Qingjun stared at this man's eyes, as if she wanted to see through his heart, through the dark flames in his black pupils, as if she wanted to see all of his secrets. After a moment, she took a step back. The cold blade slowly left his chest and was pulled out from between the flesh and blood. Blood suddenly sprayed out, but fortunately, there was not too much blood. It was probably because the sword was sharp that the wound caused was small. Lu Chun reached out to cover the wound on his chest and silently treated it. Not long after, the wound stopped bleeding. He raised his head to look at Su Qingjun. Su Qingjun had sheathed her sword at some point and walked to the blossoming peach tree. She stared blankly at the beautiful peach blossoms. They were as beautiful as gems in the night sky, exuding exuberant vitality. It is rare to see such beautiful peach blossoms on the mountains of Kunlun. At this moment, she had her back to Lu Chun. Not long ago, they had fought to the death, and she had even stabbed her sword into his chest. Lu Chun slowly walked over, glanced at her, and then stood beside her under the peach tree. The night wind blew, and the peach blossoms slightly trembled, swayed, and a few petals fell. The flowers are in full bloom, and they will probably wither in a few days, he said. Su Qingjun stretched out her hand and caught a falling petal. It was small, soft, and pink, and fell in her white and delicate palm. It was like the most beautiful words in spring, like her face when she was happy. She sighed softly and let go of her palm, letting the petal drift away with the wind. As for Xian's funeral, her family is already prepared for her. She was buried in the ancestral land in a lively and grand manner, she said faintly. She paused in the middle as if she was a little hesitant, but in the end, she still continued and said, I wanted to go and pay my respects to her, but her parents refused, so I could only pay my respects in the direction of her grave at the edge of the cliff outside the cave. Lu Chun shook his head and said, It's none of your business. You don't have to do this. Su Qingjun smiled a little sadly and said, When she was alive, she used to call me elder sister, and I used to think of her as a younger sister. In these years, I often think of her in the dead of night, and then I can't sleep. What about you? She looked at Lu Chun, stared into his eyes, and asked, In these years, you have been a fugitive, and the 4 seas are your home. In the end, have you ever thought of an old friend and couldn't sleep? No. Lu Chun met her gaze and said calmly, I have a clear conscience, and I sleep well. I occasionally think of Xian, but I don't think of her often. Su Qingjun's face suddenly paled. She turned around with a whoosh and stared at Lu Chun, shouting, That's right, you're a real man. You're truly a straightforward person. You kill people and then run off to the ends of the earth. But have you ever thought about me? Do you know how I lived these years? How many people looked at me with strange eyes? Even my parents treated me coldly and saw me as an enemy. Every time I went home, it was like entering an ice house. Every night, I would think of that night, my younger brother who died in front of me, and the scene of you killing him. Every night, I would wake up from my dream. I just want to ask you, that night, why didn't you just kill me as well? She angrily and sorrowfully asked Lu Chun in a loud voice. Lu Chun was silent. After a while, he said, At that time, I liked you. Su Qingjun's body suddenly stopped, and the entire courtyard became quiet at that moment. The night wind blew, and peach blossoms fell, bringing with them a wisp of fragrance, landing on their shoulders and hair. Chapter 434. The night was quiet and a little cold, but it also seemed a little gentle. The two of them did not speak for a while. Su Qingjun lowered her head slightly. The ancient sword in her hand had already been sheathed. Her eyes were as clear as gems, shining brightly, but she did not look at Lu Chen again. She only shook her head after a moment of silence. Then she turned around and faced her back to Lu Chen. After that day, I went to investigate the entire process of little Mo coming down the mountain and returning home. Although until now, I still find it hard to believe that little Mo would actually kill Exin, but that night, he really did kill little sister Exin. Her voice sounded a little shaky and carried a bit of helpless grief. Lu Chen silently looked at her back and listened quietly. My parents were very sad about this matter. They lost their son at such an old age, and it was killed right in front of them. No one could bear this. My mother has always blamed me, blaming me for not saving little Mo in time. So in the past few years, whenever she saw me, she would scold me or just ignore me. The night wind blew, and her clothes fluttered. Her figure looked a little frail, and her voice sounded a little erratic. That year, when we were on the mountains of Kunlun, we met by chance. Now that I think about it, you should also be a person with secrets. But that doesn't matter anymore. When I was with you in the past, there was indeed a period of happy days. It's just that my parents are still my closest relatives. Even though Lil Mo did something wrong, he's still my only brother. She turned around and looked at Lu Chen. In the night, under the cool breeze, she did not cry, nor did she look more agitated. She just looked at Lu Chen and said, I can't get over this. Although I know that little Mo deserved it, I still can't. I can spare you, but I can't do anything else. Do you understand? Lu Chen did not speak, and only responded with silence. Su Qingjun sighed faintly, and a trace of pain and resentment flashed in the depths of her eyes. Then, she turned around and prepared to leave. However, just as she took 3 to 5 steps forward and was about to leave the courtyard, Lu Chen suddenly called out to her from behind. Then, he asked a somewhat baffling question. Hey. Su Qingjun's body paused for a moment. Without turning her head, she said, What? You know that damn Baldy, right? This sentence was abrupt, rude, and not too polite. It suddenly broke or diluted the originally sad and lingering atmosphere of the night. It also stunned Su Qingjun for a moment. She didn't react for a moment and said with some surprise, Damn Baldy. Who is he? Lu Chen said, Oh, he has another name in your Kunlun party. You all call him Perfected Tianlan, right? Su Qingjun suddenly turned around and looked at Lu Chen in surprise. She was probably frightened by this person who dared to call a perfected cultivator of Huashan realm damn Baldy. After a while, she nodded in astonishment and then couldn't help frowning and saying, You, be careful with your words. How dare you be so disrespectful to Marshal Granduncle Tianlan? Lu Chen snorted and looked a little disdainful. He said, Don't worry. For so many years, even in front of him, I have directly called him that. It seemed that Su Qingjun couldn't accept that someone dared to be so disrespectful to Perfected Tianlan. She couldn't help looking up and down at Lu Chen, and then blurted out, How dare you do this? Are you the long-lost son of Perfected Tianlan? Although Lu Chen had always been calm and tough, when he suddenly heard Su Qingjun's sudden words, he almost staggered and was stunned. After a while, he came to his senses and shook his head repeatedly. He even spat and said, Nonsense. How could I be that damn Baldy's son? Su Qingjun said, Then how dare you be so rude? And how could Marshal Granduncle Tianlan tolerate you like this? Lu Chen spread out his hands and said, It's a long story. I'll tell you in detail later when there's chance. In short, you can think of it as, well, that damn Baldy owes me a lot of money. Yes, he owes me a lot. He smiled and said, So, he has to accommodate me a little. But that's not the point. What I want to tell you is that now I'm also working for him. Su Qingjun's clear eyes suddenly flashed, as if she had thought of something else at this moment. She stared at Lu Chen and said, When you entered the Kunlun party, was it also for... Lu Chen said straightforwardly. At that time, I also listened to his orders and worked for him. Su Qingjun was silent and then nodded slowly. She didn't continue to ask Lu Chen's purpose in entering the Kunlun party that year. After this period of conversation, the atmosphere between the two of them had unknowingly changed from a little desolate, resentful, and silly parting. At least at this moment, everyone was talking more normally. Lu Chun breathed a sigh of relief in his heart and said to Su Qingjun, "As far as I know, this time you came to the Immortals city from the Kunlun mountain, you should also be under the order of that damn Baldy. Moreover, there were many elites of the Kunlun party who came with you." Su Qingjun was shocked again. The way she looked at Lu Chun suddenly became a little different. She said, "How do you know about this?" She paused and then frowned slightly. She said to Lu Chun, "In addition, I don't know what happened between you and Martial Uncle Tianlan, but after all, he is a respected senior of our Kunlun party. Even to you, he is also an elder. I don't like hearing you call him by his name all the time with sarcasm." Lu Chun thought for a moment and then said straightforwardly, "You're right. Since you don't like it, then I won't call him Death Ray anymore. Well, I'll call him Supreme Tianlan from now on." Su Qingjun didn't seem to expect that Lu Chun would change his name so quickly after being reprimanded by her. For a moment, she was a little embarrassed, but for some reason, she still felt a little happy in her heart and said, Lu Chun said again, "I don't know if he told you the purpose of asking you to come to the Immortal City, but as far as I know, his biggest wish now is for the sake of the world's righteousness, to stand up and fight against the evil and cunning devil cult." While speaking, he glanced at Su Qingjun. The beautiful lady nodded slightly and revealed a smile, then said in a deep voice, "To tell you the truth, right now I'm doing this big thing for him, and the current situation is very grim. Not to mention the devil cult's savagery and cunning, the most worrisome thing is that Zhengxiaming has been peaceful for a long time. Everyone only wants to live peacefully. Many of the true lords and major sects are not willing to put in the effort to do this. Only we, under the leadership of Death Ray, true Lord Tianlan, did this arduous and thankless thing with all our heart and soul, regardless of the danger." Su Qingjun's expression changed slightly, but her eyes became brighter and brighter, staring at Lu Chun. Lu Chun nodded to her and said, "Right now the situation is difficult and dangerous to such an extent. Probably because of this, Supreme Tianlan has no choice but to borrow the strength of his own sect. But no matter what, this matter is still too dangerous. If it's possible, I still hope that some things can be done by people like me. You don't take the risk, otherwise if there's a mishap." "I'm not afraid." Su Qingjun suddenly interrupted his words. Her eyes shining, sternly said, "You're very good, but I won't be one of those who turn a blind eye to danger and stop moving forward." Lu Chun looked at her eyes, silently nodded. After a moment, he pointed to the black hole below the peach tree, and then said to Su Qingjun, "Actually, there's a reason why I came here tonight. That is the lair of the devil cult's devil cult that we found a few days ago. Now he has escaped, but I still want to go down and search carefully. Do you want to go down with me to take a look?" He looked at the beautiful lady in the night, invited with a smile. Chapter 435. After lighting 2 torches, they walked down the stone steps one after the other. Lu Chun once again came to this secret passage that did not seem to have any secrets. Su Qingjun followed behind him and looked around curiously. At the same time, her eyes also revealed a bit of caution. The fire dispelled the darkness nearby. Lu Chun looked around and found that there was basically no change from the scene in his memory. He pointed in the direction of the passage and said to Su Qingjun, "Go that way." Su Qingjun nodded and walked side by side with him. At the same time, Lu Chun softly told her the whole story of the discovery of this secret passage, including the butcher Rui Xiaotian, who had escaped and whose identity was still unknown. Towards the end, he pointed at the ancient ruins that gradually appeared in front of them and said to Su Qingjun, "Although we still can't be sure that Butcher is a member of the devil cult, I think there's an 80 to 90% chance that he is. In fact, I've already carefully searched this secret passage once before, but I didn't find anything for the time being. It looks like that person secretly dug a tunnel again, But in the end, he ran into the boundary of the true Immortal Alliance's seal ruins and couldn't go any further. Su Qing-jun nodded. Her eyes swept over the ancient bricks around, looking at the strange patterns that originated from ancient times, and finally the gravel wall that was blocked at the end of the passage. After a moment, she turned to Lu Chun and said, "In that case, you came back again tonight. Do you still have doubts in your heart?" "Well, it's true." Lu Chun nodded and walked to the side of the gravel wall. He gently touched the rough stones with his hand and said, "Although the people of the devil cult are fierce, they are not fools. This passage happened to be dug to here. One step further, and it will be the legendary ancient ruins. So I've been thinking that maybe they are secretly coveting the treasures in the ancient ruins." Su Qing-jun thought for a moment and said, "The legend of the ancient ruins here in Immortal City, I have heard people talking about it when I was still in Kunlun Mountain. It was said that it was the first treasure in the world. Do you think it's reliable?" Without any hesitation, Lu Chun shook his head and said, "Not reliable." Su Qing-jun didn't expect him to be so straightforward. She was startled and said, "How can you be so sure?" Lu Chun said, "Firstly, this ancient relic wasn't sealed for a very long time. If there really were countless earth-shattering treasures in it, wouldn't those extraordinary people and heroes of the previous generations have swarmed to it and divided it up? Secondly, even if the legend is true, and there are indeed rare treasures that we can't imagine hidden in the ruins, if that's the case, why did the ancestors of the true Immortal Alliance seal this place by force? Obviously, if it's not that they didn't fancy the treasures here, even with their all-knowing powers and supernatural powers, they couldn't take those things out. What's more, they might have discovered something even more terrible in the depths of the ruins. In order to avoid bringing disaster to the human world, they had no choice but to seal this place." Su Qing-jun was silent for a moment, nodded and said, "I didn't think so much before, but after hearing what you said today, I feel that it does make some sense." Lu Chun smiled and said, "It's just a little guess of mine. It's nothing much. Actually, I myself didn't have much interest in this ancient ruins, but after discovering this secret passage, I had an idea." "What is it?" Su Qing-jun asked. Lu Chen's eyes swept across that ice-cold stone wall and said, "If this secret passage was really deliberately dug by the evil sect, then I will guess, could it be that they have discovered some unknown secret, so they're secretly probing or trying to enter?" Su Qing-jun was stunned for a moment, said, "Do you think it's possible for the evil sect? This is a prohibition set up by a few deity-stage true monarchs of the previous Zhengxian Ming. Not to mention ordinary people, even a highly skilled cultivator would not be able to break it." Lu Chun smiled. His expression seemed to have some subtle emotions. After a while, he was heard softly saying, "I think, no matter what, we can't underestimate them. After the number of madmen increases, it's hard to guarantee that one or two unimaginable geniuses won't suddenly appear." Lu Chun patted the stones beside him, calmly said, "The two of them stayed in this tunnel for a long time, but just like before, there were almost no traces of suspicious clues, so in the end they returned without any results. After walking out of the secret passage and returning to the surface, the night breeze gently caressed their faces, making them feel somewhat comfortable compared to the pressure in the underground secret passage. It made them feel much more comfortable." Su Qing-jun also seemed to have returned to normal, her expression somewhat cold. Probably to her, all kinds of entanglements in the world, after all, could not be so casually ignored. She coldly greeted Lu Chun, then prepared to turn and leave. At this time, Lu Chun called out to her. He actually did not have any more entanglements. He only told Su Qing-jun about his residence in the alley at Shima Bridge and briefly talked about the current situation in Immortal City. In the end, he seemed to hesitate for a moment, then said to her, "Although, I don't know why Dead Guan, Tianlan Supreme, suddenly transferred a large number of your Kunlun party's elites to Immortal City to be under his command, but this person has always been far-sighted and has a great vision. Once he has made up his mind to do something, it will definitely be a big matter that cannot be underestimated." Su Qing-jun glanced at him, did not speak. Lu Chan said again. Although Kunlun is a famous righteous sect, although the sect rules say that when you cultivate and practice martial arts, you are born to unsheathe your sword for the world's common people, righteousness and righteousness. But great matters must have great risks. Sometimes it may even be unexpected. Just like the evil sect these years, although they are declining. But believe me, no matter what, you cannot underestimate them. The common people's righteousness is very good, but one's life is one's own. I don't know the trade-offs. Everyone has their own views. I just want to tell you, be careful. Lu Chun looked at Su Qingjun, calmly saying. Su Qingjun was silent for a long time, but in the end, she did not say a word, only nodded slightly, then turned and left. Not long after, her figure disappeared in this dark night. The night wind blew. The peach tree next to him swayed with the wind. The grass and trees in the courtyard were quiet and lonely, leaving only Lu Chun standing here alone. He looked around, suddenly feeling a little emotional. If it was not for the bloodstains on his chest and the faint pain, perhaps the woman just now was also a bit like a dream, floating in, floating away, not leaving a trace. Life is like a dream. Maybe everyone is just a passerby. Lu Chan looked at his own hand, grabbed the air, then opened it to take a look, but there was nothing. He could not grab anything. He stood on the spot and pondered for a while, suddenly said to himself, "Looks like I can't find anything here. Should I go back and catch Atsu? That dog has a good nose. Maybe he can find something." Chapter 436. Immortal Guyu of Zhangxiameng Star Hall had always been a very low-key person, except for a few days ago, when she suddenly became high-profile and invited the other 5 soul formation perfected cultivators of Zhangxiameng to her Star Hall for a discussion. This was a grand occasion that hadn't been seen in Zhangxiameng for many years. Of course, it also caused many people to speculate, but unfortunately, these 6 high and mighty soul formation perfected cultivators were talking behind closed doors. Everyone was chased out of the Star Hall, so they could only speculate anxiously outside. What were these 6 big shots discussing? Was it going to be a big fight? Could it be that they were preparing for some earth-shattering event? Or were they just chatting after not seeing each other for a long time? Well, no one believed the last possibility. Who were soul formation perfected cultivators? How would they have the time to sit and chat with you? In short, the hottest topic of conversation in Immortal City was this closed-door meeting of the 6 perfected cultivators. But on Sky Dragon Mountain, where the headquarters of Zhangxiameng was located, it was still calm and peaceful. Everyone was doing what they were supposed to do. Life was like usual, ruling the world when they were awake, sleeping on the knees of beauties when they were drunk. This was a fairy-like life. Why bother? On this day, the people of Star Hall were chased out of the hall by that immortal Guyu again. No one dared to disobey the immortal Guyu, so they all left obediently. But everyone was curious, so they walked to a place tens of feet away from the Star Hall and stood there discussing. This year, this immortal Guyu was a bit strange. Why did he keep doing this? In the past 10 years, he had never done this, but the amiable him had complained to his subordinates several times, saying that this hall was too big. Wouldn't it be miserable to stay in it alone? Or perhaps there would be another gathering of the 6 perfected cultivators today? This idea immediately made the people of Star Hall excited. If this was really the case, it meant that something big was really going to happen. However, such a big matter naturally couldn't stand up to careful investigation. Immediately, someone went to ask a few questions and found out that the other divine transformation perfected monarchs had no intention of coming to the Starry Hall. They were either working, meditating, daydreaming, or simply closed their doors and refused to meet guests. In short, no one came. It seemed like Guyu Supreme wanted to be alone today. This immortal is getting weirder and weirder. The people of the Starry Hall were discussing this behind his back. They were guessing with curiosity and excitement without scruples. Just as his subordinates had guessed, Supreme Guyu was sitting alone in the huge Starry Hall. Similar to the last time when the 6 Supremes held the meeting, he was sitting right below the huge dome, looking up at the dome that looked like a boundless starry sky. The Grand Star Hall was silent, without a single sound. Occasionally, a gust of wind blew in from the huge window at the side of the hall, spiraling and surging. The wind carried a piece of fallen leaf that came from nowhere, floating and finally landing silently in front of Guyu True Monarch. True Monarch, Guyu calmly looked at the leaf, his eyes gradually revealing a trace of pity. Just as the leaf was about to fall to the ground, suddenly, a tall and sturdy figure appeared in front of him like a ghost. It looked like a small mountain, and with one foot, the leaf was trampled under his foot. Supreme Guyu was startled, then couldn't help but say, "Hey, you stepped on a leaf?" The person in front of him was wearing a wide robe, tall, and the most eye-catching thing was that he had a big, shiny, bald head. It was Supreme Tianlan. After hearing Supreme Guyu's words, Supreme Tianlan was stunned for a moment, then subconsciously took a step back and looked at the bottom of his feet. He saw that the leaf that was stepped on was half yellow, half green. One side was curled up, looking dull. Supreme Tianlan frowned and said, "No way, old man. Are you muddle-headed? You're actually being kind to a leaf that fell?" Supreme Guyu sighed and said, "Everything in the world has spiritual energy. Every blade of grass and every tree is a living being. This leaf didn't fall anywhere else. It was blown into this starry hall by the wind. Maybe it's a metaphor from the heavens for us." "Bullshit." Supreme Tianlan scolded straightforwardly. "If you continue to be so mysterious, I'm leaving." Don't go. Supreme Guyu's expression turned serious. He put away his pity expression and put on a smile. He laughed and said, You damn baldy, everything is good, just that your temper is too bad. After all, you have been a spirit-severing true monarch for so many years. It's not enough to just have a high cultivation level." Supreme Tianlan sat in front of him, squinted at him, and sneered, "Oh, this is interesting. Tell me, other than cultivation level, what else do we need?" "We need to cultivate our mind," Supreme Guyu said frankly, pointing at his heart. He smiled and said, "You and I are both people of the highest realm in the human race. We have great power. We need to be wary. We can't manipulate politics and harm the people's lives. Moreover, we need to cultivate perseverance, and work hard for the suffering of the people in the world. We also need to have a kind heart. We need to treat people. Scram, we have already cultivated to spirit severing. If you are still so annoying, then what's the point of cultivating so hard?" Supreme Tianlan sneered and said, "You only know how to say nice things. I haven't seen you run out to do anything good these few decades. You only know how to hide in this hall and look at the roof all day." Supreme Guyu retorted, "That's not an ordinary roof. It's a map of the stars and moon. There's a heavenly secret in it." Supreme Tianlan thought about it and said, "Great. If there's really a heavenly secret, no one in this world is better than you at playing tricks. Help me see what will happen to me in the future." Supreme Guyu was stunned and said, "Why are you asking this out of nowhere?" Supreme Guyu smiled and said, "I just wanted to ask when I saw you, why can't I?" Supreme Guyu said, "Of course you can ask, but I can't answer you." Supreme Guyu revealed a look of disdain and said, "So, you're really playing tricks? Or are you going to come up with the excuse of not divulging the secrets of heaven and bringing disaster upon yourself if you do?" Guyu True Monarch said seriously, "That's not it. Let's not talk about the backlash of revealing the secrets of the heavens. Your cultivation is too high, and there's a strong fate covering you. The fog is deep, and the flowers cover your eyes, so I can't see clearly." Supreme Guyu looked at him and said, "Ordinary people can't do it. Even you, who is known as the world's best divination master, can't do it." Supreme Guyu shook his head and said, "I really can't tell." Supreme Guyu shrugged and said, "Forget it. I don't care anyway, and I'm not here for this." Supreme Guyu said, "What's the matter? Tell me." Supreme Guyu thought for a moment and said, "Can you predict the exact date of the appearance of the blood moon that you mentioned previously?" Supreme Guyu shook his head and said no. After a pause, he added, "At least not now." Perfected Lord Tianlan replied with a but his expression did not change much. It seemed that he was not very surprised by this answer. He quickly changed the topic and said, "All right, do me a favor. Help me divine something." "What is it?" 2 leaves, and a seed. Chapter 437. True Monarch Guyu had a strange look on her face as she took out a large pile of items from somewhere. A large and beautiful hawksbill turtle shell, 5 black stones that emitted a cold light, an 8 trigram plate, a purple gold 3-legged dragon tiger cauldron, 6 or 7 incense sticks, a piece of something that looked like broken tree bark, a stack of yellow talismans, a talisman brush and cinnabar, and so on. Even with true Lord Tianlan's experience, he was a little shocked. Seeing true Lord Guyu leisurely arranging the items around him, he couldn't help but ask, "I say, it's just a simple divination. Do you really need to bring so many items?" True Lord Guyu said indifferently, "That's why I look down on outsiders like you. You don't know anything and talk a lot of nonsense. Divination is about fate, calculating the secrets of the heavens. How many people can do it since ancient times? Do you think that the streets below the immortal city are filled with people who draw lots to tell fortunes and cheat people of money?" True Lord Tianlan frowned, and his expression became more serious. He sized up True Lord Guyu and nodded. You're right. Now that you mention it, you're indeed much more imposing than those fortune-tellers on the streets. Nonsense. These are all genuine abilities. And these items, they're all treasures. True Lord Guyu pointed at the many artifacts in front of him and said proudly, "Do you see that turtle shell? It's a South Sea hawksbill turtle. Those 5 black stones, don't think that they're eye-catching. They're actually outer space black meteorites. And this tree bark? Wrong, this is a 1,000-year agarwood." And he muttered to himself for a while. Sure enough, every single item laid out on the ground was a rare treasure or peerless spiritual material. Even though some of them looked ordinary, they were actually priceless treasures. After True Lord Tianlan finished listening, he looked at True Lord Guyu and smiled. "You old thing, you actually hid so many good things all these years, I couldn't tell. I can't compare to you guys." Perfected Guyu smiled, and then looked at Perfected Lord Tianlan meaningfully. "I only have a little toy in my hand for fun. If you really want to do something big, you won't be interested in it and won't need it. You need to think of another way." After pondering for a moment, Perfected Lord Tianlan leaned forward slightly and asked in a low voice, "What is it?" Guyu True Monarch said indifferently, "Whoever manages money is the richest." Perfected Lord Tianlan didn't seem to be surprised by Perfected Lord Guyu's words, but his eyes obviously lit up. He looked at the master of Starry Hall without blinking and said, "It's a big fat sheep over there, but there's too much money in goods. The jackals, wolves, tigers, and leopards that they're raising are also astonishing. I'm afraid it won't be easy to get them." Guyu True Monarch sneered and said, Don't pretend. Sheep are the only things that can be reared in a sheep pen. Aren't the real wolves and tigers on Sky Dragon Mountain under Black Shadow?" Perfected Lord Tianlan stared at him for a long time and suddenly clapped his hands and sighed. I've misjudged. I didn't expect the most cunning person on this mountain to be you. To think that I've been keeping an eye on those people for so many years. Now that I think about it, I'm really shocked and ashamed." Perfected Lord Guyu shook his head. "You don't have to belittle yourself or think too highly of me. I'm old and I don't have much time left. The people in Starry Hall are all mediocre. Even if I want to do something, I won't be able to do much, not to mention fight against those ferocious tigers and wolves of yours." Perfected Lord Tianlan said, "You've always played safe in the past. Why did you suddenly stand out this time?" "Because the blood moon is near." Perfected Lord Guyu said without hesitation. "Great changes are coming, and it's hard to predict whether it'll be a blessing or a curse. It's fine if everyone is muddling along, but you're the only one with a murderous aura. You've been having so much fun by yourself all these years. I'm afraid you're ready now?" Perfected Lord Tianlan hesitated for a moment and nodded. "It's about time." Perfected Lord Guyu pointed at him and seemed to be speechless. He put down his hand helplessly and said, "That's why I say, if I have to choose, I'm not like those idiots below. I've secretly watched you for so many years and seen your methods. If I don't stand on your side, wouldn't I be an idiot? Perfected Lord Tianlan smiled. You can play safe. As long as you don't stand out, you know I won't make things difficult for you. Bullsh asterisk T. Perfected Lord Guyu scolded. You want me to pretend that I don't see these mountains of wealth? Cultivation doesn't need money. Enjoyment doesn't need money. Being a virgin every day, using pills and cauldrons to live forever, and raising such a bunch of useless people doesn't need money? Perfected Lord Tianlan was stunned for a moment and nodded. You're right. Then his expression turned serious, and he said solemnly, Great things are actually difficult and dangerous. How can it be so easy to be on the line between life and death? But if you help me, it'll be like giving me charcoal in snowy weather and adding wings to a tiger. I'm willing to make a deal with you. After the matter is done, we'll split the profits equally. I won't go back on my words. Perfected Lord Guyu looked at him, and after a moment of silence said, No. Perfected Lord Tianlan's expression changed slightly, but his tone was still very polite. Then please tell me, Brother Guyu. Perfected Lord Guyu said, I'll take 20% and you take 80%. Perfected Lord Tianlan's face revealed a surprised expression as he didn't expect Perfected Lord Guyu to propose such a disadvantageous condition. Why is that? True monarch Guyu smiled bitterly, but said calmly, Because you are too strong. Your killing nature is too strong, and your subordinates are vicious and bloodthirsty. If the plan succeeds, it will definitely be your side that puts in more effort. At that time, I will get too many things, and that will be the path to disaster. 20%, I only want 20%. Perfected Lord Guyu stretched out 2 fingers and said, Young Master Qian, be content with what you have. At that time, you'll probably care about my past relationship and won't be too embarrassed to do anything to me. Perfected Lord Tianlan stared at Guyu for a long time and nodded slowly. He sighed and said, In my entire life, other than my teacher ancestor Tian Hong, I've never respected anyone. It is only today that Brother Guyu has made me feel respect. I don't respect your Tao arts and divine arts. I don't respect your forces. I only respect your wisdom and understanding of the world. Perfected Lord Guyu waved his hand and said that he didn't dare to accept it. He raised his head and looked up at the dome of the hall. The vast sky was filled with stars, deep and unpredictable. Darkness filled the air, but he still couldn't see the legendary blood moon. Let me ask you something. Perfected Lord Guyu said. Speak. Perfected Lord Guyu skillfully burned the incense for divination while wiping the hawksbill star stone with a serious expression. At the same time, he casually asked Perfected Lord Tianlan, I remember that there are a total of 4 divine tree treasures passed down in the demonic cult. They are 1 branch, 2 leaves, and 1 seed. Why do you only want me to divine the divine leaf and the divine seed? Don't you want to divine the branch too? Perfected Lord Tianlan said indifferently, No need. I've already found the branch. Chapter 438. Found it. True Lord Guyu was clearly startled and seemed to want to ask a few more questions. However, he quickly thought of something, and after looking at True Lord Tianlan's expression, he silently nodded and did not mention anything else. It's still unclear whether something like the heaven and earth god tree exists or not. The people from the devil cult believe it without a doubt, while we from the righteous path scoff at it. However, at our level, our way of thinking is different from ordinary people. Guyu took the huge and gorgeous 10,000-year-old hawksbill turtle and placed it in front of him. At the same time, he said indifferently, But what we can be sure of is that the 4 treasures of the heaven tree passed down by the devil cult are definitely not ordinary items. They might even contain divinity's spiritual energy, so it's very easy for them to be concealed by the power of divination. According to the saying of our divination, it's probably because spiritual objects are naturally protected by fate. True Lord Tianlan nodded his head and said, I've heard of this saying before. Divination is very popular in the world, but there are many people who pretend to be gods and ghosts. Most of them are liars, or they've only learned a little and are not capable enough. The items that I want to divine are divine objects. After thinking about it, only you have the ability to do so. Guyu picked up the few black meteorites and held them in his hand. With a trace of arrogance on his face, he said, "You're right." After saying that, he shook his wrist and threw the few black stones on the shell of the hawksbill turtle. A few of the black stones started spinning nonstop. One of the stones that was spinning the fastest even let out a slight whistling sound. Perfected Lord Tianlan's gaze also fell on the stones that were spinning in circles. At the same time, he said casually, "I say, you've taken out so many priceless heavenly and earthly treasures here. Is it really that difficult to divine those divine objects?" Guyu did not answer him. Instead, he took the 1,000-year-old agarwood and broke it in half with 2 fingers. Even with his status, a pained expression flashed across his face. However, he did not hesitate. He rubbed the agarwood in his hand, and it instantly turned into powder. Then, it slowly fell from the sky and landed on the hawksbill turtle's shell and the spinning black stones. Perfected Lord Guyu looked at perfected Lord Tianlan. "Hey, let me borrow your pure yang, true fire." True Lord Tianlan laughed. He did not ask much, nor did he make any posture preparations. He flipped his palm and pressed it down. A thick and heavy aura suddenly appeared in the starry hall. After a while, a flame that was almost pure white and even carried a hint of gold surged out from his palm and landed on the shell of the hawksbill turtle. The flame seemed gentle and harmless, but even someone like true Lord Guyu had a slight change in expression when he saw it. In fact, in this world, this seemingly inconspicuous flame divine ability was almost one of the most powerful dermic powers. Even soul formation perfected monarchs had to be wary of such flames. However, the preciousness of heavenly treasures and rare spiritual materials was finally revealed at this moment. Under the pure yang true fire that seemed harmless, but was actually terrifyingly powerful and could melt anything, the 10,000-year-old hawksbill turtle and the black meteorite did not move at all and did not show any reaction. However, in contrast, the 1,000-year-old agarwood ignited when it came into contact with fire. It instantly burned and turned into ashes. Then a strong fragrance instantly surged out like a flood and filled the entire starry hall in the blink of an eye. True Lord Guyu slowly retracted his hand and looked at the black meteorite that was gradually slowing down on the hawksbill turtle's shell. He suddenly said, "You asked me if adding these treasures to the divination ceremony was useful?" "Yes." True Lord Guyu said, "Actually, there's not much of a use. At least when I did this in the past, I didn't feel that my spirit energy was stronger, my mental state was better, or any other particularly powerful effects." True Lord Tianlan was shocked and looked at him in confusion. "If that's the case, why did you still? But some things in this world just don't make sense." True Lord Guyu said, "I've tried many times in the past. It was clearly me who did the divination, and the state before and after were similar, or even almost the same. However, I couldn't divine most of the time without adding these treasures. Although I didn't succeed every time after adding these seemingly useless treasures, the chances of a good outcome increased by at least 50%. He looked at true Lord Tianlan helplessly. "That's how it is. I don't know why either. Can you see anything?" True Lord Tianlan was also stunned and didn't know what to say. After a while, he said, "There's actually such a strange thing." True Lord Guyu took the purple gold 3-legged dragon tiger cauldron that looked luxurious and extravagant. He lit 3 incense sticks and inserted them into the cauldron and placed it beside the hawksbill turtle. After a moment of silence, he said, "Tianlan, people like us who have cultivated our entire lives to reach this realm shouldn't believe in the will of the gods anymore." True Lord Tianlan said, "I don't believe it." True Lord Guyu nodded. "I didn't believe it at first either. But all these years, I always felt that there seemed to be an inexplicable force in the unseen world. It can't be seen or touched, but I can vaguely sense it." He pointed at the things in front of him and said, "Let's take divination, for example. Sometimes, I'll think that maybe there's really a god or a god hiding in a place that we can't see. Divination is to predict the fate and the future. How can it be so easy? Even if you have the ability to do so, if you don't add these precious and rare treasures and offer them as a tribute, why would the God of heavens will let you see those things for nothing? Do you think what I said makes sense? He asked True Lord Tianlan. True Lord Tianlan looked at him and suddenly grinned. Then he said, to put it simply, you're giving good things to what you think is the will of the gods. After bribing them, they'll give you benefits and you'll be considered to have succeeded, right? True Lord Guyu thought about it and couldn't help but laugh. That seems to be the case. True Lord Tianlan shook his head. I don't believe that. After a pause, he said, even if there really is a god, it won't hinder my determination. True Lord Guyu seemed to have expected such an answer. He nodded calmly and closed his eyes. After an unknown period of time, the purple gold incense burner was surrounded by green smoke. The black stone on the hawksbill turtle stopped moving and formed a strange pattern. The surrounding fragrance was rich, and Guyu True Monarch's body suddenly trembled. Then, she suddenly shook violently, and a trace of blood flowed down from the corner of her mouth. True Lord Tianlan's expression was solemn. After a while, True Lord Guyu opened his eyes. His voice was also a little hoarse. He said softly, these few divine objects of the demonic cult are really powerful. True Lord Tianlan took a deep breath and said, how is it? True Lord Guyu said, among the leaves, one is still in the south and the other is now in this immortal city. Also, that seed has the strongest divine power. The backlash I suffered is because of that. True Lord Tianlan was a little nervous and asked, can you see the whereabouts of the seed? True Lord Guyu hesitated and said slowly, if I'm not wrong, the seed is now in the immortal city. Perfected Lord Tianlan's expression changed abruptly as his eyes lit up. Chapter 439. Old Ma, are you asleep? Not yet. What's wrong? In the dead of night, in the bedroom of the Shima Chiao residence, Lu Chun, who was lying on the bed, and Old Ma, who was making a mattress on the floor, were still awake. The only one who was asleep was probably Atsu, who was lying on the other side. Lu Chun was lying flat on the bed, his eyes looking at the dark roof, or perhaps he was simply staring at the darkness. After a moment of silence, he said, I met Su Qingjun. There was a little noise coming from the ground beside the bed. It came from Old Ma's side. After a while, Old Ma asked with slight surprise, where did you meet her? Lu Chun said, in the butcher's house. I bought 2 pots of wine that day. Later, I found that there seemed to be someone following me, so I went around and planned to make a move. But then I found out that it was her. Old Ma paused and said, the wound on your chest. Lu Chun said, she stabbed me. Old Ma suddenly became silent. After a while, he seemed to smile bitterly and said, well, at least she didn't really kill you. You did such a thing in the Su family that year. It's not surprising that she fell out with you. Lu Chun was silent for a moment and said, I don't regret it. Old Ma said, I didn't say that you regret it, nor did I say that you did something wrong. Sumo is really bad. She did so many evil things, killed Exin, and even abused you. She should have been killed. It's just that Su Qingjun isn't a bad girl. From her point of view, you killed her younger brother in front of her and her parents. It's only right and proper for her to seek revenge on you. Lu Chun sighed and said, I know. I don't blame her. Old Ma suddenly smiled and said, but she actually let you go even though her sword stabbed into your chest. Is she really interested in you? Lu Chun's eyes flashed in the darkness. Then he calmed down and said, don't talk nonsense. She is still a knowledgeable woman. Unlike her parents, she knows what is right and wrong. These years, she also secretly learned the truth, so that's why she didn't kill me that day. Old Ma turned over on the ground and looked at Lu Chun's figure on the bed. How is her cultivation and strength now? Lu Chun pondered for a moment and said, very strong. Compared to the time when I was at Kunlun Mountain, I have improved a lot. Among the cultivators below the nascent soul realm in Kunlun sect, even if I'm not the strongest, I'm one of the few. Old Ma clicked his tongue and said with some emotion, "Sigh, people really can't be compared with others. Especially with talented people like you, it can really piss people off." He paused as if he thought of something and asked, "What about you? You fought with her. What was the result? You were beaten to the point that you couldn't fight back?" Lu Chen thought for a moment and said, "It should be a draw." Old Ma laughed and scolded, "You were almost stabbed to death by her, and you still have the nerve to say it was a draw." Lu Chen also laughed, but didn't say anything else. After a while, he sighed soundlessly in the darkness. "I was thinking, why did the damn Baldy summon a Kunlun party elite like Su Qingjun to Immortal City? And I heard that there were a few powerful Yuanying state generals who came with her. What does he want to do?" Hearing Lu Chen mention that Tianlan Supreme, Old Ma's words suddenly became cautious. After thinking for a while, he said in a low voice, "How can we guess this kind of thing? Maybe Lord Supreme has a big game of chess in his mind. For example, he wants to deal with the devil cult?" Old Ma tried to give an answer. "Yes." Lu Chen also turned over on the bed and said to the edge of the bed, "Of course, this is one of the reasons." Now, it seems that both inside and outside the devil cult are saying the same thing. It's just that since the Battle of the Barren Valley more than 10 years ago until now, although there are still some remnants of the devil cult jumping out to cause trouble from time to time, but from the overall situation, I don't think they are worth such a big fight. Old Ma coughed and said, "I say, didn't you always insist on chasing after the devil cult and never let down your guard?" Lu Chen snorted and said, "Of course I think so, and my thinking has not changed. But to be honest, do you think that now, not to mention the whole Zhengxiaming, even the strength in Fuyunji will be weaker than the devil cult?" Old Ma was silent for a while and said, "Fuyunji is mysterious and unpredictable. Even if we are in the picture, we can't see it clearly. The only one who can control the overall situation is probably Lord Supreme, maybe with Shuang. But if we really have to face it head-on, I still choose Fuyunji. It's stronger here." "That's right. The Fuyun Agency and the Devil Sect have been fighting and killing each other for dozens of years. How many experts and assassins are hidden in the darkness? No one can say for sure. It's precisely because we're inside that we know how terrifying this power is," Lu Chan said, "but it's also because of this that I can't figure out why the damn Baldy still wants to strengthen his force, even mobilizing the elites from the Kunlun party. Maybe what he wants to deal with in the future is not necessarily only the devil cult." Old Ma suddenly stopped talking. After a while, he slowly sat up in the dark. He first glanced at Lu Chun, then sat on the edge of the bed and leaned against it. He sighed and said softly, "You think too much." Lu Chun looked at Old Ma's silhouette in the dark and said calmly, "Am I wrong?" Old Ma shook his head and said, "I don't know. Maybe you're not wrong. It's just that people like us, why do we think so much and think so deeply?" Lu Chan faintly said, "If I don't think more, if I don't think deeply, I would have died in the devil cult. I've been used to it for so many years, I can't change it." All right. Old Ma waved his hand like he was surrendering. Then he casually asked, "A person who thinks deeply, then tell me, other than the devil cult, who else does our master want to deal with that he needs to use such a big force?" Lu Chan said, "You can't think of it." Old Ma said, "I can't think of it. Now that the world has been peaceful for so many years, only our Zhengxiaming dominates." Halfway through his sentence, he suddenly stopped speaking. After sitting there for a while, Old Ma turned his head and looked at Lu Chun. Lu Chun also looked at him. "There's no need for this, right?" After a long time, Old Ma suddenly asked faintly. Lu Chun snorted and said, "You have to ask that damn Baldy. It's useless to me." Old Ma thought for a while, lowered his voice, and said softly, "I still don't think it's possible. No matter how you look at it, there's no reason to do this. And if it's really so, there's a few enemies, and their strengths are also shockingly strong. We may not be able to defeat them. Now that only this group of people has been transferred here, it can be said that it's to deal with the devil cult. Anyway, few outsiders know the real strength of Fuyunji. But what if this is only the first batch? What if there are more people coming over?" Lu Chan said, "What if that damn Baldy becomes ruthless and directly brings all the masters of the Kunlun party to Immortal City. Are you crazy? Old Ma said. What if that damn Baldy is really a madman? Lu Chen asked back. Old Ma was tongue-tied and suddenly had nothing to say. Chapter 440. Black Dog, Ah-Tu, rolled over on the ground and grunted a few times. Perhaps it was dreaming about something, but it soon fell back into a deep sleep. The bedroom was still dark and quiet. For a while, Lu Chun and Old Ma did not speak. After a long time, Old Ma sat on the edge of the bed and said in a low voice, "It's the middle of the night. Why are you suddenly telling me this instead of sleeping?" Lu Chun was silent for a while and said, "I have no one to tell except you." "All right." Old Ma smiled bitterly and said, "Although what I said before is a little exaggerated, but if you really want to think about it carefully, it is not completely impossible, although I think you think there is only a small possibility of this kind of thing." Lu Chen interrupted him and asked. After being questioned by Lu Chun, Old Ma thought for a while and then suddenly cursed in the dark. Then he said, "Damn it, it seems very possible." Lu Chen snorted and said, "Both of us have been working with that damn Baldy for more than a decade now. Even though his heart is as deep as the ocean and unfathomable, we can still more or less sense some of the clues. I'll only ask you one thing now. If in the future, do you think the devil cult is easier to deal with? Or those people in Xingxiaming are easier?" Old Ma had always been cautious, but after chatting with Lu Chun for so long tonight, his mind was a little agitated and unconsciously became bolder. After a moment of silence, he said in a deep voice, "Before the Battle of the Barren Valley more than 10 years ago, I might have chosen the devil cult, but now it must be our allies." Lu Chen nodded and said, "I think so too." After a pause, he continued, "This matter is really too big, and the strength of the people over there is almost impossible to estimate. If they really fight, it will be an earth-shattering battle. No matter who wins or loses, Tianlong Mountain will certainly be covered with blood." Old Ma nodded slowly and said, "Most likely." Old Ma's body trembled slightly as he thought of the terrifying scene that might happen in the future. He felt his hair stand on end. Lu Chun patted his shoulder and whispered, "What's wrong? Are you scared?" Old Ma snorted coldly and said, "I haven't lived long enough. I don't want to die yet." "I don't want to die either," Lu Chun said. "Then what do you mean?" Old Ma asked. "You suddenly talked to me so much tonight. You're not just complaining, are you? Or could it be that you already have an idea in your heart?" In the beginning, Old Ma's tone was still very calm, but towards the end, he suddenly became a little excited. He moved closer to Lu Chun and looked at his face in the darkness. He lowered his voice and said softly, "I say, could it be that you really have an idea?" Lu Chun looked at him and suddenly laughed. "I remember that you often advised me to wholeheartedly work for that damn Baldy. Why did you suddenly change your mind this time?" Old Ma was silent for a moment and said, "Lord Perfected has always been good to me, and I have always been loyal to him. However, if there really is an earth-shattering change in the future, it will be very difficult for me to survive because of my low ability. Besides, to put it bluntly, I am different from you. You may be a talent that Lord Perfected values, but I am actually just a dispensable person. Even if the sun and moon are renewed in the future, and the universe is reversed, and you are rewarded according to your contributions, you can achieve meteoric success, but what can I earn? Besides, I actually don't really want to die. Therefore, I was thinking that if I can have a way out, you think I can achieve meteoric success?" Lu Chen interrupted him and asked. Old Ma hesitated, but finally nodded and said, "Yes, we have been brothers and friends for so many years. This is what I really mean. I think Lord Perfected still thinks highly of you. As long as you can help him achieve great things and make great contributions, as long as you don't die, he will definitely." Lu Chan lightly said, "Although I've been risking my life in the evil sect for so many years and seem to be indifferent to life and death, but actually I really don't want to die. Whether it is for that damn Baldy or some illusory righteousness and justice, I still don't want to die. As for meteoric success, don't mention it." Oma took a deep breath and said, "Well, since we have already said it like this, do you have any idea? Yes. Luchan leaned close to Old Ma's ear and whispered. That voice was unusually low. Only Old Ma could hear it. Old Ma frowned in the darkness and listened carefully. After a while, Luchan finished. Old Ma thought for a while, shook his head and said, No, your idea is too risky and it will be easily detected by others. Luchan was slightly surprised and said, Well, then do you have a better idea? Old Ma was silent for a moment and said, Don't be anxious. Let's think about this carefully. Anyway, there should still be time. No matter what, this concerns both of our lives. We must strive for perfection. Luchan grunted and said, Then what should we do about pursuing the demonic cult now? Old Ma asked back, What do you think? Luchan said lightly, Deal with it first. It's best if we can find out, but if not, then drag it on. Anyway, the evil sect is very mysterious. It's normal that we can't find them. Maybe we can find an excuse to search for the evil sect and leave Immortal City first. Old Ma's eyes lit up and said, Hey, this is a good idea, but it's too difficult to hide it from Lord True Lord. Luchan seemed to have similar concerns. After nodding, he said, Let's see first. Both of them said nothing and then went to sleep. But in the deep night, no one knew that in this darkness, some people's hearts were already slightly disturbed. The next morning, Balian woke up early as usual. After changing her clothes, she took a stroll in the courtyard. After a while, she saw the door opposite her open. It was Atu, the black dog, running out with its tail wagging. It then laid on the grass and stretched its back. After a yawn, it became energetic again and started playing around the courtyard. White Lotus walked over. Atsu glanced at her and took a few steps back vigilantly. White Lotus was a little unhappy. She glared at Atsu and said, You mutt, you have no conscience. How long have I known you? And we've interacted a lot. I haven't harmed you much, not counting that year, at least after we met this time. I haven't done anything to you, right? How can you be so stingy? Atsu stared at her and wagged its tail, but still didn't have any intention of coming closer. White Lotus became more and more annoyed. But at this time, there was a sound from the other side of the door. It was Luchan and Olma walking out. Luchan saw White Lotus and greeted her, then said directly to her, Last time when we entered the city, didn't you get a big carriage that could fit Atsu and a few of us? Yes, what's wrong? Asked White Lotus. Luchan said, Can you get another one? I want to use that carriage again today. White Lotus was startled and said, Of course, that's not a problem. But where are you going? You'll know when the time comes, said Luchan. About an hour later, White Lotus sat in the spacious carriage, looking at the familiar house outside through the curtain with a complicated expression. Behind the high wall, did the peach blossoms wither? Chapter 441. What are we doing here again? White Lotus was the first to ask Luchan when the three people and a dog arrived at the increasingly desolate house. Luchan pointed to the underground secret passage and said, Let's go down and check again. White Lotus looked a little reluctant. She frowned and said, This place should have been searched long ago. Didn't we find anything? Wouldn't it be a waste of time to come again? I say, are you two men so free? Marshal Uncle Tian Lan asked you to help him. Why do I feel that you are deliberately slacking off? Luchan shook his head and said, How can this be called slacking off? The last time I came here, I really didn't find any clues related to the devil cult. But later I thought about it carefully. The butcher who ran away is still very likely to be a devil of the devil cult. So we still need to search this place carefully. Maybe we may find something new. White Lotus looked like she didn't believe him. She said very frankly, You must have searched carefully the last time. Did you check every corner under the secret passage, especially near the gravel wall? Why can't we find it last time, but this time we can? Luchan coughed and then said seriously, What you said actually makes a lot of sense. So after learning from the painful experience, I brought Atsu here this time. This dog, Atsu, is very talented and is very good at tracking, much better than us practitioners. So I want to bring it here to have a look. Maybe it can find something. He paused and then said, If even Atsu can't find anything, then forget it. I will completely give up on this place and never come back again. White Lotus glanced at the black dog standing beside Lu Chun. It was wagging its tail slightly and looking around curiously. For a moment, she didn't know what to say. After a while, she smiled reluctantly and silently walked aside. Lu Chun and Old Ma began to prepare on the spot, such as torches and flint. After all, it was very dark after going down the secret passage. During this time, they saw White Lotus walk to the peach tree alone and stand a little far away from them. Old Ma took the opportunity to ask Lu Chun, "I just wanted to ask you the same question as White Lotus. Last night, didn't we secretly discuss that if something big happens in the future, we will run away? In this case, before that, I thought we could only muddle along and pretend. We have to think of a way to escape in private. Why do you look like you are still working very seriously?" Lu Chun glanced at him and said, "Running away in the future and chasing after the devil cult are two different things. These two have nothing to do with each other. We have to think of a way. But for the devil cult, we still have to chase after them." Old Ma rolled his eyes and mumbled, "All right, I hope before we think of a way to escape, we won't be killed by those lunatics from the devil cult first." Lu Chun glanced at him and smiled. "Don't worry. Look at how many years I've been dealing with the devil cult, and I'm still alive and kicking. What's there to be afraid of?" Old Ma spat and said, "You can brag to anyone in the world, but don't brag in front of me. I've seen how you were in King Shutang village for the past 10 years. Lu Chun laughed heartily, and his laughter traveled to the peach tree. White Lotus turned her head and looked over. With an annoyed expression, she shouted, "Hey, why are you two grown men dilly-dallying like this? Are the torches ready? If they're ready, come over quickly." The flowers on the peach tree had not withered yet. The peach blossoms were still blooming beautifully in the wind. However, there were still signs of decay at the edges of the branches. Some of the petals had withered, and some of the leaves had curled up. When the wind blew, more petals and leaves fell down. When they walked past the peach tree, Old Ma glanced at it and said, "The peach blossoms are blooming well." Lu Chun nodded and said, "Yes, they've been blooming for a long time and they haven't withered yet." With a whoosh, the torch streaked across the air. Lu Chun took it from Old Ma and was the first to walk into the secret passage. At the same time, he whistled and the black dog immediately ran over. Just as Lu Chun was about to tell it to follow him, Atsu glanced at the dark hole and ran down without hesitation. It was as if it was not afraid of the darkness at all. It didn't look like it was its first time here at all. Lu Chun was startled and called out to Atsu, but Atsu had already walked into the darkness. Lu Chun shook his head and said, "This dog is a little strange today." Although he said that, Lu Chun didn't care too much. He held the torch and walked down. Behind him, White Lotus had a complicated expression on her face. She looked at Lu Chun's back and then followed him without saying a word. Old Ma walked at the back with a torch in his hand. Although he had known this place for a long time, he had never come down this underground secret passage. Today was the first time. Before walking down the stone steps and entering this secret passage, his eyes swept across the seemingly desolate and dilapidated courtyard. Finally, his eyes stopped on the blooming peach tree for a moment. He seemed to frown slightly, but his footsteps didn't stop. The darkness spread over and swallowed his figure. The huge immortal city was located on the fertile Four Rivers plain and nurtured countless living beings. There were countless secrets hidden in this huge city without city walls, but there were also countless dark corners that no one knew about. Most people in the world knew of the evil devil cult. In the past many years, they were afraid of this cult and kept a respectful distance from it. But there were also people who stood up bravely and fought against the devil cult for the sake of the common people and justice. They tried their best to block this terrible devil cult from people's sight and life. There were many such people, but the most famous one was of course the world-famous true Lord Tianlan. He and the Fuyunji that he founded single-handedly fought against the devil cult for decades. They never stopped and never retreated. They paid a heavy and bloody price in exchange for today's peace. This was a statement that many people heard and believed because it was true. The number one enemy of the devil cult today was Fuyunji. But in Zhengxiaming, including the organization Fuyunji, although they would never admit it on the surface, many people knew clearly that in this Zhengxiaming headquarters, in the most powerful immortal city in Fuyunji, in this ostentatious and comfortable city, the devil cult was lurking here. For so many years, the devil cult had been hunted down, slaughtered, and tried every means to exterminate them. But this evil cult still stubbornly survived. And until now, people still couldn't find any trace of the devil cult in the immortal city. Knowing that their terrible enemies were in this immortal city, but they couldn't find them, and every night they would be afraid that those madmen in the dark would suddenly rush out and start massacre. What kind of feeling was this? Shui Ying had such an unusually complicated feeling. She was a beautiful woman, but it had been many years since a man dared to get close to her. Sometimes she would secretly fantasize about it in her heart, but very soon she would chase this weak thought out of her mind. Especially on this day, when she was in a daze, she suddenly received a secret report. Fuyunji spies in the immortal city suddenly reported that they had found a person who looked very much like the leader of the devil cult in the western continent, Fan Te. Shui Ying's expression was cold, but she instantly felt a surge of hot blood in her heart. She secretly clenched her fists. It's here, it's finally here. In this world, there is only one person who could make Fan Tue leave his base in the western continent and sneak into the immortal city. That was the only remaining and most mysterious leader of the devil cult, Elder Ghost. Chapter 442. Fuyunji was founded by true Lord Tianlan. They had been working hard in the immortal city for decades and had the support of Zhengxiaming and true Lord Tianlan. Naturally, they were like fish in water, and their influence reached every corner of the immortal city. Of course, no matter how powerful Fuyunji was, it was impossible for them to know everything and grasp all the secrets. For example, they'd been tracking for decades and still could not find the evil cult's stronghold hidden in the immortal city, and could not catch the mysterious Elder Ghost. But if one looked down on Fuyunji because of this, it would be a big mistake. No matter how bad the evil cult was, they once had the glory of being the best in the world. But because they were too extreme and made too many enemies, they gradually weakened. Especially the battle in the Barren Valley 10 years ago, it was a watershed. The evil cult suffered a great loss in that battle. 7 to 8 out of 10 of their elites were gone, and from then on, they were completely on the decline. As for the main culprit in this matter, it was none other than the Floating Clouds Company. After that, Fuyunji's reputation flourished, and could be said to have entered the most powerful and prosperous era since its founding. Even in the whole of Zhengxiaming, it was one of the most powerful halls, which made people raise their eyebrows. And in the recent 10 over years, the Fuyunci still did not have the intention to let off the evil faction. Not only did they persist in pursuing and killing the remaining evil faction members, they also pursued the only remaining leader, Elder Ghost, relentlessly, with the intention of killing him. This was almost an open secret, and Elder Ghost and the remaining evil faction organizations hiding in the immortal city were even more cautious, like birds startled by the mere twang of a bough, desperately hiding in the darkest places, also waiting. Shui Ying and her subordinates, including the killers and shadows who were also hiding in the dark, had been chasing after the last demon for so many years, but had never succeeded. There were a few times when they seemed to be so close, but in the end, Elder Ghost still escaped. And in this process, although the remaining evil cult members suffered heavy losses, Fuyunji also paid a hefty price. Many people lost their lives forever in the fighting in the dark. Both sides were already a blood feud that would not end until one side was dead. And this time, it seemed that a new opportunity had come. Since the birth of Fuyunji, it had always carried a strong and unyielding temperament. Whether it was the words and deeds of this organization, or the means that seemed to be as fierce or even crueler than the devil cult, it had an unusually bright color. It was also obviously different from the ethereal and fairy-like image that most of the other halls of Zhengxiaming were born with. Even though the leader of this generation of Fuyunji was a beautiful and charming woman, it seemed that this woman's methods were more ruthless and cruel than most men's. There were many people in Zhengxiaming who disliked Fuyunji, but at least for now, no one could do anything to them. Therefore, Fuyunji appeared to be extremely arrogant and powerful. However, for Blood Warbler, who was in charge of Fuyunji, life was not as glamorous as it seemed. The world was dangerous. Sometimes, she even felt that the friendly forces were more troublesome than the cruel devil cult. However, life had to be lived. The devil cult had to be eradicated first. After receiving the news that the leader of the Western Continent's devil cult, Fan Tue, had suddenly entered the Celestial City, Blood Warbler was pleasantly surprised. However, she quickly calmed down and immediately made detailed arrangements. She mobilized the forces of Fuyunji and started to closely monitor this person. Yes, they were only monitoring him, not capturing him. In Blood Warbler's heart, no one could compare to that damned, cunning elder ghost who had been in hiding for many years. As long as they could capture and kill that evildoer, then suppress him with the powerful forces of Fuyunji, even if the devil cult was not completely destroyed, it would not be able to make a comeback for at least 30 to 50 years. This matter was so important that Blood Warbler even put down everything she was doing and personally went to the scene to direct the arrangements. Of course, with the abilities of Fuyunji and the potential of operating in the Celestial City for many years, they were almost omnipotent. If they were willing, they could even replace their spies in every shop on the entire street. Blood Warbler sat in a tea house with a veil over her face. The customers around her all looked very quiet and casual, maintaining a certain distance from her. Occasionally, the waiter in the shop would come over with a teapot to add water for her. At the same time, information was continuously being passed on through the notes left between the waiter's fingers. Fan Tue had already entered the city. Fan Tue had entered the White Tiger City district. He was walking alone, and he did not see any accomplices. Fan Tue entered a flower shop on the other side of the long street. Fan Tue left the flower shop and continued to walk forward. The flower shop had already been surrounded by us. Fan Tue bought an old book from a roadside vendor. The owner of the flower shop had already been detained. Fan Tue looked around the street, as though he was looking for something. The owner of the flower shop had no problems. The vendor was brought to the side for questioning. Fan Tue stopped in front of tavern, looking as though he wanted to enter. The vendor had no problems and was released. Blood Warbler, who was sitting in the tea house, calmly glanced out of the window. She saw that Fan Tue was standing in front of the tavern on the opposite side of the street. He first looked around casually, then pushed open the door and walked in. Blood Warbler frowned and stared at the tavern for a while. She suddenly waved her hand, and a man immediately walked over. He stood beside her with his hands clasped behind his back. Blood Warbler said, "This 3 Mile Fragrance Tavern sounds familiar. Is it on the list we had in the past?" Without hesitation, the man said, "It's this place. We had suspected a chef in the past, but we could not find any evidence, so we recorded it as suspicious. After that, we handed this place over to Old Ma and the rest according to our orders. Our people have not come here since." Blood Warbler grunted and said, "There's probably something wrong with this tavern. We're the people from Old Ma's side." The man paused for a moment, then said, "We just looked. Not a single one of them came today." A hint of anger immediately flashed across Blood Warbler's face. Fortunately, the veil covering her face blocked it. After a while, she said in a low voice, "Ignore them. The bigger picture is more important. Bring some people in and see if those demons from the Devil Sect are up to no good." This order was quickly passed down, and after a short while, one could see some changes in the tranquility of the long street. Some passers-by laughed as they approached, some hawkers carried their goods and walked nearby, and some beggars sat near the tavern, looking pitiful as they begged for money from the passers-by. There were 2 or 3 groups of people. Some looked like husband and wife, some were friends chatting and laughing, and some were muscular men of few words. They entered the tavern separately. The weather looked clear, and the streets were bustling, just like it had been every other day. At a certain moment, Shui Ying, who was sitting in the tea house, suddenly had a slight change in expression, as if she had sensed something. She abruptly stood up, but at the same time, a deafening sound suddenly rang out from the tavern called 3 Mile Fragrance. Boom! The deafening sound seemed to be heard by the entire immortal city. It reverberated between heaven and earth and did not dissipate for a long time. Chapter 443. A huge roar rang out in an instant. Before the crowd could react, they felt the ground beneath their feet suddenly tremble violently. It was as if an earth dragon had turned over its body in the legends. All the houses and streets on this long street began to shake violently. Debris and dust continuously fell from the sky amidst the roar. The houses in this tea house were also creaking. The beams and pillars were swaying visibly, as if they were about to collapse at any moment. Shuang did not care about the danger around her. She rushed to the window and looked across the street. A huge and blazing flame was reflected in her beautiful and clear eyes. It was a huge pillar of fire that had risen out of thin air. It soared into the sky. Within the billowing black smoke, the raging flames were like a ferocious beast, as if it wanted to destroy everything around it. The center of the pillar of fire was the 3 Lixiang Tavern. At the same time, a huge wave of air rushed out from the surroundings of the pillar of fire. The surrounding houses and pavilions immediately collapsed like they were made of paper. They were immediately engulfed by an even more intense flame. The tavern that had been peaceful and leisurely not long ago had completely disappeared in the blink of an eye. It had been completely erased from this world. Correspondingly, those who had disappeared along with it were, of course, the people who were still in the tavern at that time. There were even many innocent people around the 3 Lixiang Tavern who had been affected by the explosion. This was an abnormally violent explosion. It was beyond everyone's expectations. No one could have predicted such a fierce and cruel counterattack, including the experienced people of Fuyunji on the streets. When the explosion was over, the huge pillar of fire was still burning. Black smoke billowed in the sea of fire, and the ears of all the people who were still alive were still buzzing. However, the earth finally calmed down and stopped shaking. The unstable walls of the buildings collapsed, and those that were strong enough managed to hold on after shaking for a long time. However, the people inside were still covered in dust and dirt from the falling dust. On the long street outside, there were only wails and screams. From here, there were a few people wrapped in flames who were rolling on the ground. There were even more people lying on the ground in the distance. The flames were burning their bodies, but they were already motionless. Shuang tightly gripped the railing in front of her. Her knuckles were as pale as her face. They were almost transparent. Thanks to the sturdiness of the tea house, the building did not collapse. Although it was only a street away, nothing major had happened here. Behind her, many people had fallen to the ground. They were currently slowly climbing up, as if they had not woken up yet. Shuang looked at the tragic scene on the long street, and then at the tavern that had completely disappeared in the depths of the flames. A trace of extreme anger flashed through her eyes. Her body trembled slightly, as if she was about to fall into a state of madness. However, very quickly, she once again forcibly suppressed all her emotions. Her eyes became clear again. She decisively turned around and shouted, "Hurry, follow me. Let's save people first." Her words woke everyone up. Shuang then took the lead and jumped down the building. The others hurriedly followed. However, at this moment, the flames were soaring into the sky. Before they even got close, they could feel a wave of heat hitting them. Even though they were cultivators, they did not dare to get too close. Clearly, there was something strange about the flames caused by the explosion. They were much more powerful than ordinary flames. It was not realistic to put out the fire in a hurry. With Shui Ying in the lead, the group could only first rescue the injured at the edge of the fire. Those who had luckily escaped were dragged to a safe area far away. Those who were still burned by the flames were thrown to the ground. There were people who came over to put out the deadly flames with all their might. Screams and howls still reverberated, but as time passed, these sounds gradually became softer. Some people finally died in pain, while others quietly moaned at the side after escaping disaster. Occasionally, there would be a few who were too heavily injured and could not hold it in any longer. They would suddenly scream loudly, causing people to feel a soul-stirring feeling when they heard it. Half of Shui Ying's body was covered in dust. She stood on the long street. Some of her subordinates were busy saving people, while others were putting out the flames. However, everyone seemed to subconsciously stay away from her. Her figure looked abnormally lonely. Perhaps she had never been so fragile before. This fire was quickly put out. However, the reason for this was not because Fuyunji's people were efficient or fast. Instead, after the terrifying energy released by the flames seemed to have suddenly lost their support. At a certain moment, they suddenly withered. The towering pillars of fire dissipated, and the burning flames were extinguished. All that was left was a scene of desolation and chaos. The heat wave in the air had greatly lessened, but there was still a hot wind blowing past, as if it was recording the hellish horror from before. Shuang slowly walked into the depths of the fire. Along the way, there were broken trees, broken rocks, cracked ground, and a pile of charred, unrecognizable corpses. The scene was abnormally horrifying, causing one's scalp to go numb. However, this beautiful woman seemed to completely ignore it. Step by step, she walked forward and finally arrived at the original location of the tavern. The Three Li Xiang Tavern had already disappeared. A wave of heat blew past, sweeping up a corner of her clothes. Shuang stared blankly at the ground in front of her. Everything on this piece of land had disappeared into thin air. What was left was a huge pit that was almost 30 meters wide and had been burnt black by the flames. She stood next to this huge pit, looking so small. Lu Chun, Old Ma, White Lotus, and the black dog they brought with them had already entered the secret underground passage. Because they had made ample preparations before coming here this time, each person had a torch. Therefore, the darkness in the secret passage was quickly dispelled by the bright light of the fire, and it was as bright as day. Lu Chun walked in front, preparing to lead everyone, especially Atsu, to the wall of crushed rocks. Unexpectedly, before he could say anything, he saw a black shadow sweep past. Atsu ran in front of him again, and then jogged towards the wall of crushed rocks. The words that Lu Chun was about to shout out were forcibly swallowed back. He looked at Atsu strangely. However, this secret passage actually only had one direction, and there was nowhere else to go other than that. It was probably Atsu who found the direction himself. Lu Chun shook his head, a little puzzled, but still followed. White Lotus followed behind him, her expression becoming more and more complicated. However, under the faint worry, there seemed to be a hint of a smile that she could not help but smile. Not long after, they came to the side of the wall of crushed rocks. Lu Chun said to Atsu, "Look around here, see if there is any strange place." Before he finished speaking, he was suddenly startled. He looked at Atsu with some astonishment. It did not seem to have any intention of sniffing around. Instead, it directly put its feet on the wall of crushed rocks, then pointed at a smooth, round stone, and turned back to Lu Chun and barked loudly. Lu Chun was a little frightened by this dog. He was stunned for a moment, and subconsciously said, "Damn, this stupid dog has become a spirit now." Chapter 444. Atsu's behavior naturally attracted the attention of everyone in this secret passage. Old Ma and White Lotus both walked over and looked at the place where Atsu barked and pressed its feet. Lu Chun walked up and looked at it carefully. He felt that it was a little familiar. The stone in front of him was like a section of a stone pillar that had been cut off. It was not so conspicuous in a pile of rubble, but when he touched it with his palm, he could still feel the smoothness and fineness that was different from the surrounding areas. Lu Chun quickly remembered that when he came here for the first time, he had also noticed this place. However, after the last inspection, he did not find anything suspicious. At the same time, he did not find any clues in other places, so he left here. However, he did not expect that Atsu would also be interested in this round stone today. Judging from its appearance, it went straight to this stone as soon as it arrived. It did not even look at other places. Could it be that there was something special about this stone that made it so obvious that he could not see it? Lu Chun thought for a moment and could not help but turn to Old Ma and White Lotus and said, "Do you two see anything wrong with this stone?" Old Ma and White Lotus walked to his side. Old Ma looked at it carefully for a while and touched the stone with his hand. After a while, he shook his head and said with a trace of doubt, "I can't see it." Lu Chun looked at White Lotus again. White Lotus walked up calmly, patted, touched, and looked at it. Then she turned back and said to him, "This stone is not strange." Oh, Lu Chun was also speechless for a moment. He walked forward and began to touch the stone himself. In any case, there must be something strange about Atsu looking for this stone as soon as it arrived. Behind him, Atsu had already walked to the side and was lying on the ground. It raised its head and looked at White Lotus. White Lotus coughed and walked over to touch Atsu's head. She said to it very affectionately, "Atsu, are you hungry? I will find the best and most delicious demon beast meat for you later, okay?" Woof! Atsu barked and put his head back on the ground. Lu Chun touched the wall for a long time, but still could not find anything suspicious. It seemed that the round stone was just a stone that fell into this stone wall by accident. There was nothing too strange about it. He shook his head and was about to give up and let Atsu check out other places in this secret passage. Suddenly, the torches in their hands that had been burning quietly suddenly flickered in this quiet secret passage. Atsu, who had been lying lazily on the ground, suddenly pricked up its ears and raised its head. It seemed to have sensed something and was a little confused. After a moment, Atsu suddenly jumped up from the ground and barked at Lu Chun with a loud and ear-piercing voice. Woof, 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 woof. Lu Chun and the others were startled and turned around to look. However, before they could react, all the earth and walls in this underground passage, including the wall of rubble, suddenly shook violently. At the same time, from a place that seemed to be very, very far away, an incomparably loud and muffled sound rang out. It was like the roar of a giant beast that had been hibernating deep underground for thousands of years. It penetrated directly into the ears and made one's heart jump. Immediately after, the entire ground began to tremble. It was as if a wave was surging out of the deep soil like a flood, rushing in all directions. The secret passage began to shake violently, and they could hardly stand still. Accompanied by the incessant barking of Atsu, large and small stones fell from above, as if the cave was about to collapse. Lu Chun shouted, "Go, it's going to collapse!" Old Ma and White Lotus turned and ran, and Lu Chun and Atsu followed behind. At this time, as the secret passage shook more and more violently, a strange heat wave seemed to spread from the ground, and in the blink of an eye, the place was as hot as a steamer. Old Ma ran desperately towards the exit, cursing, "What the hell? Is there an underground volcano?" Bai Yin snorted beside him, as if she was very disdainful of his words. In the blink of an eye, she saw that the exit of the secret passage had already appeared in front of them. Bai Yin exerted strength in her legs and suddenly flew out. Like a streak of white light, she flew to the exit in an instant and then turned around and jumped out. "You run so fast." Old Ma rolled his eyes. Among the three of them, his cultivation was obviously the weakest. Even his speed of running for his life seemed to be the slowest. But at this time, he could not care so much and ran desperately with all his strength. However, things like talent and cultivation were really everywhere. In the blink of an eye, Lu Chun had also caught up. When he overtook Old Ma, he even had the time to look back and smile at him. Old Ma was furious, cursing as he ran. "It's so unfair. You talented people can even run faster than us. Do you want us mortals to live?" Luchin laughed, paused slightly, and stretched out his hand to support Old Ma's back. Old Ma only felt a force suddenly added to his body, and suddenly his pace doubled. In the blink of an eye, he rushed to the exit of the secret passage and saw the light outside. Old Ma laughed and said, "Good brother." Lu Chun pushed him out and was about to go out and scold him when suddenly he seemed to think of something. He stopped and looked back. Atsu had disappeared. In that split second, when everyone was running for their lives, Atsu, who originally ran out with him, suddenly disappeared. Lu Chen's face suddenly became gloomy. He was very clear about Atsu's current strength. Back in the Nanjiang and the Great Snow Mountain, in terms of escaping, perhaps the 3 people present today could not compare to this black dog. But why did not follow them? Old Ma's voice came from outside, shouting, "Come out, Lu Chun." Lu Chun did not answer, but looked into the depths of the secret passage. He saw that in the depths of the passage, which was still shaking violently, there seemed to be a black shadow that looked like Atsu. It stopped in the secret passage, but turned around and looked at the place where the broken stone wall was. At this time, a strange red moonlight suddenly and strangely appeared in the depths of the darkness. Boom! There was a loud noise, as if something above had fallen. Listening to the movement, it seemed that the peach tree, which had always been in full bloom, had fallen in this unexpected earthquake. Old Ma's voice was filled with anxiety. Obviously, he, who was standing outside, did not know why Lu Chun was still in the secret passage, including the black dog. Old Ma raised his voice and shouted anxiously, "Come out, Lu Chun! The cave is about to collapse." Below the cave, the strange red moonlight was getting brighter and brighter. Gradually, a trace of outline emerged and reflected on the broken stone wall. The source of the moonlight was the strange round stone. Atsu stood in the violently shaking cave, looking a little hesitant. It looked back at Lu Chun, but the blood-red moon in front of it seemed to be an irresistible temptation. So after a moment of hesitation, Atsu turned back and walked into the depths of the cave again. The black figure was about to walk into the darkness, into the strange blood shadow. Lu Chun gritted his teeth, glanced at the blood moon expressionlessly, and then jumped up again without hesitation, rushing in the direction where Atsu ran. Even if the sky was falling and the earth was collapsing, he would catch this damn, stupid dog that had gone through life and death with him. Chapter 445. Shuiying stood on the street that had just been burned by the flames, looking at the huge pit that had suddenly appeared in front of her, her face pale. On the ground beside her, there were still many unextinguished flames still burning. The inside of the pit was even more turbulent. Even the air was a blur, and traces of scorched black could be seen everywhere. As for that tavern, it had completely disappeared from this world, including the people inside. But was it all of them? Shuiying stared at the depths of the pit. In the scorched black soil that had been burned by the flames, there were cracks and crisscrossing cracks. There were many places where hard stones that were buried deep underground could be seen. It looked like the corners of a huge building. Shuiying suddenly clenched her hands, shocked. The screams and shouts on the streets were still incessant, but the situation was much better than when the explosion had just occurred. Shuiying attached great importance to the devil cult's strange movements this time, and had arranged a large number of Fiyunji's men on this long street. She had originally thought that if the devil cult's most mysterious ghost elder revealed any traces, Fiyunji would launch a large-scale attack and capture this great demon who had been hiding and on the run for decades in one fell swoop. Of course, this idea had now become a pipe dream, but another unexpected benefit was that Fiyunji had many people here, and their efficiency in providing aid became extremely high. Such a violent and sudden explosion, and that incomparably ferocious and obviously strange flame. After the fiercest momentum had passed, the situation was quickly controlled. Many of the injured were quickly put out of the flames on their bodies and pulled to a safe place. Many of the houses that had been on fire were intercepted, put out, and even directly pushed down. In a very short time, an isolation zone was quickly cleared around the area of the explosion and thus prevented the possibility of the fire spreading. So even though the situation at the center of the explosion was terrible, the surrounding situation quickly calmed down. After a while, the man who had been next to Shui Ying in the tea house walked over, his expression solemn. He stood behind Shui Ying and said in a low voice, "Home Master." Shui Ying did not turn around and only asked in a low voice, "How is the situation?" The man hesitated for a moment before saying, "Of the brothers outside the 3 Li Xiang Tavern, including those on the street and in the neighboring houses, 14 are dead, and nearly 30 are severely injured." At this point, he paused and seemed to subconsciously lick his lips with his tongue, as if he felt some bitterness in his mouth. He said in a low voice, "There were 11 people who entered the tavern, and now they are all gone." They were all gone. Shui Ying's pupils contracted slightly. Even though this sentence was a little tactful, the meaning behind it was very clear. 11 living people had entered the tavern and then exploded, disappearing. This was a true death without a complete corpse. Perhaps their bodies had been smashed into pieces. Shui Ying lowered her head slightly and looked at the ground under her feet. Not far away from her was the edge of the huge pit. Amidst the scorched black ground, she could still vaguely see the frightening blood-red color in the soil. Everything was mixed together. What about the people from the devil cult? Shui Ying took a deep breath and asked again. The man said, "From the beginning to the end, only Fan Te entered the tavern. The others did not notice anything out of the ordinary, and we can't find him now. Perhaps he was also in the tavern just now." "Impossible!" Shui Ying suddenly interrupted him. Her pale face was filled with extreme anger. She said in a cold voice, "Fan Tue is the leader of the Western Continent's devil cult. The devil cult will not abandon him so easily. This person must have escaped." The man was stunned for a moment, and then said in shock, "But we surrounded the area just now. Even a bird could not fly out." "That's impossible." Shui Ying was about to speak when she suddenly sensed something. She abruptly raised her head and looked toward the sky. The sky, which had been shrouded by billowing black smoke not long ago, became clear in the blink of an eye. A light breeze blew, but 4 clouds floated over and floated in the sky above this region. Sunlight shone down, but it seemed to be unable to shine into the depths of those clouds. Shui Ying's body suddenly trembled. The last bit of color on her face seemed to have disappeared, and she even instinctively held her breath. An aura that was as powerful as a tsunami slowly spread down from the sky. It did not hurt anyone, but it made one's heart beat faster, and they felt reverence. Very quickly, many people in the surroundings also noticed the sudden abnormality in the sky. They all raised their heads to look. A moment later, a cloud suddenly floated down and landed on the ground. Not long after, the strong wind blew away the cloud, revealing an abnormally tall and sturdy body and a face that was not angry but dignified. The sunlight shone on his shiny bald head, reflecting a ray of light. Whoosh, smoke and dust billowed, and the commotion calmed down. True Lord Tianlan landed on the side of the large pit, not far away from Shui Ying. Many of the Fiyunji experts in the distance, including those who were lightly injured, knelt down and paid their respects. True Lord Tianlan did not turn back. He merely waved his hand toward the people behind him. Thus, the crowd stood up once again, including the man beside Shui Ying. The entire street was silent at this moment. There was only the occasional sound of the firewood cracking when the remaining flames burned. Many people's gazes fell on the abnormally petite and fragile figure standing beside True Lord Tianlan's burly body. The silence in the air was so stifling that it was hard to breathe. Ever since he landed, True Lord Tianlan had been looking at the bottom of the large pit. He did not even glance at Shui Ying, who was standing beside him. Shui Ying's hands were clenched into fists. She closed her eyes and opened them again. Then, she slowly lowered her head and said softly, "It's all my fault. Please punish me, True Lord." True Lord Tianlan did not reply. He frowned slightly as he looked at the charred marks at the bottom of the large pit and the bluestone brick walls exposed in the soil. He seemed to be deep in thought. Suddenly, he raised his head and glanced at the sky. The 3 clouds in the sky were still there. The enormous and heavy pressure seemed to be everywhere. When the wind blew, he seemed to be able to see the mocking sneers and unfathomable gazes in the sky. After a while, the 3 clouds slowly rose and then disappeared without a trace. True Lord Tianlan was silent for a while. Then he asked, "What are the casualties?" Shui Ying reported the number she had just learned with a slightly trembling voice. She did not dare to omit a single person. After hearing the heavy casualty figures, True Lord Tianlan's expression seemed to become even more unsightly. Under the suppression of his enormous aura, everyone held their breath as if they were afraid of the thunderous might of heaven. However, the expected rage did not appear. In the end, True Lord Tianlan only said in a slightly low voice, "There are 2 things I want you to do immediately. First, seal off the entire street. Search every house carefully. Don't leave any gaps. Anyone who is related to the devil cult, capture them." Shui Ying lowered her head and said, "Yes." True Lord Tianlan pointed at the area at the bottom of the large pit. His eyes flickered. "Send people down immediately to dig up the soil and expose the bluestone and brick walls. If it's ruins, see if there are secret passages. Those demons might have escaped through here." At the end, his expression finally became somewhat unsightly. Chapter 446. Lu Chun, who was running in the dark, looked back. With the remaining light from the torch that had fallen to the ground, he could see a faint light coming through the hole. Amidst the rumbling sounds of falling rocks and the falling rocks and soil, he could hear the old horse's panicked and anxious voice outside. "Come out! Come out! Come out!" Boom! With a loud bang, the earth and rocks suddenly collapsed and covered the entrance. Old Ma's voice was also blocked outside, so no sound could be heard from inside. Lu Chun ran with all his might, dodging the falling dirt around him while his eyes burned with a deep black fire. After a while, he caught up with Black Dog Atu, who was running in front of him, and slapped it on the head. Atsu glanced at him and did not stop running. It grinned and stuck its tongue out. It seemed to be very happy. Lu Chun scolded, "Stupid dog, what are you doing?" Atu ran forward, growled in a low voice. A beam of red dim moonlight suddenly shone down from the front, passing through all the obstacles in this darkness, yet serene like a passageway leading to hell, shone on the ground in front of them. Lu Chun paused, and his heart jumped. He looked up and saw that in the darkness, the gravel wall was also shaking violently. A blood-red moon slowly appeared on the wall in a distorted scene, emitting a strange dark red light. Atu let out a fierce roar and sped up his pace towards the blood moon. Lu Chun didn't even have time to warn him before he saw countless cracks suddenly appear on the stone wall after a loud boom. The stone wall creaked, and the red moonlight trembled violently. Then, the once indestructible wall suddenly collapsed, and in the middle of the blood moon, a large pitch-black hole appeared. Even from afar, one could feel the sinister chill coming from within. Atsu's roar became louder and louder, as if it had an unusual yearning and desire for that direction. Almost without any hesitation, it rushed toward the black hole covered by the red light of the blood moon. Lu Chun, of course, saw that Atsu was very abnormal at the moment. He did not know what was in the black hole, but at this moment, there was no turning back. The tunnel was collapsing faster and faster, and it was about to be completely buried by the stones. Lu Chun could only curse in his heart. Then, he leapt forward and followed Atu into the cave before the dark rocks that were falling down like a surging tide completely submerged them. Just a moment later, there was a loud bang outside. Then all the light and sound were covered, and everything disappeared. The ground above the ground was also shaking violently. Old Ma and White Lotus could not stand steadily. They staggered and struggled to stabilize their bodies. After a while, the surroundings quieted down, but the courtyard in front of them looked like it had been changed beyond recognition. Some parts of the ground were bulging, and some parts had collapsed. The originally flat ground now looked like a towel that had been twisted into a ball, including the peach tree that had bloomed for many days at the entrance of the cave. At this time, the peach tree finally fell. Its petals fell into the black mud, and the peach tree was also broken in the middle, buried in the gravel and mud. In the mess, Old Ma rushed to the entrance of the secret tunnel. Looking at the tightly blocked mud below, his face was pale, and he wanted to cry, but had no tears. His mouth was wide open, and for a long time, he could not say a word. At this time, White Lotus came over. Looking at the entrance of the secret tunnel, she was also stunned. After a moment, she turned to Old Ma and asked in astonishment, "Where is Lu Chun? Why didn't he run out?" Old Ma's face was blank, and it seemed that even his voice was not stable. With a trace of trembling and choking, he said bitterly, I don't know, but I clearly saw that he ran easily and even had the strength to help me and push me out. He should have run out." White Lotus was also speechless. After a while, she seemed to think of something again. She suddenly looked around the courtyard, and then her eyes widened again, as if she could not believe it. "Where is Atsu? Didn't Atsu run out?" Old Ma said blankly, "It seems so. I didn't see it come out. Is it also buried underground?" White Lotus said angrily, "What the hell is wrong with these two? Don't they usually run away faster than anyone else? Why are they suddenly silent at this critical moment?" Then she comforted Old Ma, "Forget it. This is also a natural disaster. You don't have to be too sad. As the old saying goes, good people don't live long, and bad people don't die easily. Lu Chun and Atsu, I don't mean to criticize them, but they are really crazy and cunning. Maybe they won't die so easily." Old Ma stood in the same place and thought for a while with a bitter face. Suddenly, he jumped up and clapped his hands as if he had made up his mind. "You are right. In any case, we have to find a way to save people first. In this way, you stay here and see if you can think of a way to save them first, or just dig some soil. I'll be back soon." Saying this, Old Ma strode to the gate. White Lotus shouted behind him in surprise, "Where are you going?" Old Ma said without looking back, "I'm going to find perfected Lord Tianlan and ask him to save Lu Chun." Bai Lian stood there and watched as the old horse disappeared. She turned around and stared blankly at the secret passage that had been buried by the mud and stones. Suddenly, she frowned and muttered to herself, "That's strange. If a normal person was buried like this, wouldn't they be dead a long time ago? Why does Old Ma seem to take it for granted that Lu Chun is still alive and even wants to find Martial Uncle Tianlan to save him? This person is really weird." His inexplicable strange ability seems to be very similar to those shady shadows in Fuyunji. White Lotus blinked, and there was a glimmer in her eyes. Although they had suffered heavy losses and suffered heavy casualties, Fuyunji was a powerful hull. The experience of being bathed in the sea of life and death for many years was quickly revealed at this moment. Extinguishing the fire, saving people, sealing off, and searching. Everything was carried out in an orderly and efficient manner. At the same time, a large number of people were summoned here from other places in the Immortal City. At the center of the explosion, a large number of people from Fuyunji jumped into the big pit and began to dig vigorously under the hot pit. True Monarch Tianlan and Shui Ying did not leave. They had been standing at the edge of the crater, quietly looking down. They watched as more and more of the green bricks and rocks were revealed, as well as the strange patterns that were faintly discernible by others. It seemed to be a part of a deep underground palace. It was at this moment that an exclamation suddenly came from the bottom of the big pit. A moment later, someone shouted loudly, "Dug it, dug it! It's dug it, it's dug it!" Someone dug a big hole in this piece of green bricks. Chapter 447. The seal of the underground relic has been broken. In the Star Hall of Sky Dragon Mountain, perfected Lord Tianlan, who came uninvited, asked Perfected Lord Guyu. Looking at him, sitting on the ground casually, he seemed to be very familiar with this place because he had come here a few times recently. Perfected Lord Guyu didn't mind. After chasing away his subordinates and servants, there were only the two of them left here. Even he himself was lying down casually. Yes, he directly laid down on the ground and looked at the strange starry sky map on the dome of the hall. Probably not yet. Otherwise, the Immortals city wouldn't be so peaceful. Perfected Lord Guyu gave this answer after thinking for a while. He then sat up and waved his hand. A 1-meter-long map appeared in his hand. With a swoosh, it unfolded on the ground between the two of them, revealing all kinds of complicated patterns. This netherworld master diagram was left behind by our Star Hall's ancestor. Look here, here, and here. True Monarch Guyu's finger pointed at the scroll a few times, her expression calm as she said, "These important places are the places where the ancestors in the past laid down a powerful seal, firmly suppressing the ethereal palace. There can be no mistakes." And outside the netherworld, there are 3 levels of underground palace with many restrictions and mechanisms. If ordinary people don't have this map, it would be extremely difficult to find a way. Perfected Lord Tianlan nodded. His eyes flickered as he looked at the mysterious map in front of him. After a while, he said, "It is indeed a supernatural power. Amazing." True Monarch Guyu said, "When the ethereal palace was sealed back then, it was my family's grandmaster who was in charge of this matter. However, your esteemed master, old ancestor Tian Hong, has an extremely long lifespan and exceptional talent. Could it be that he didn't leave any words for you?" Perfected Lord Tianlan's eyes drooped. "My master never mentioned this when he was alive." Perfected Lord Guyu nodded. "None of the descendants and disciples of the other seniors know about this. They must have made an agreement back then." As he said that, he looked at the scroll again, and then his fingers slowly swept across the map until it reached an inconspicuous area at the edge of the map. He raised his head and said to True Lord Tianlan, "The cave dug by the demons of the devil cult is roughly in this position. It's still far from the netherworld, so there's no need to hurry. It's just that I didn't expect them to be able to break through the outermost restriction. It's going to be difficult to deal with later on." Perfected Lord Tianlan asked, "What do you mean?" Guyu True Monarch's finger slowly moved around the outside of the scroll, saying, "The underground labyrinth is crisscrossed, and with the ancient traps and restrictions, it is extremely dangerous. But if all of these things are dealt with, then these paths are connected in all directions. So long as someone is willing to make use of it, then perhaps they would be able to connect to all parts of the city underground without anyone noticing." Perfected Lord Tianlan fell silent. After a while, he said, "I understand. I'll handle this matter." As he said that, he stood up, as if he was about to leave, but he stopped and said to Perfected Lord Guyu, "Is the appearance of the blood moon a sign of instability in the netherworld?" Perfected Lord Guyu frowned, and after a moment of hesitation, he said, "You can't say it completely. When the blood moon appears, it will also be when the netherworld's power is at its highest in 1,000 years. At that time, many demons and monsters will be restless, but as long as the seal is fine, it should be able to endure." As he said that, he paused for a moment, then said, "It's just that we still don't know when the blood moon will appear. It's said that when the blood moon is about to appear, there will be strange signs in the world. But I've been observing the astronomical phenomena these days, but I haven't seen any ominous signs. It's really strange." As he said that, Perfected Lord Guyu's face became a little gloomy, and he muttered to himself, "Could it be that there's something wrong with the omen on the yin-yang diagram?" Perfected Lord Tianlan raised his head to look at the star chart on the dome of the hall, his expression calm. He didn't reply, and only said, "According to what you're saying, it'll be fine as long as we don't let these demons and clowns enter deep into the netherworld." Perfected Lord Guyu nodded and said, "Yes, but these people have actually stretched their claws into the underground ruins." He sneered and said, "Evil sect demons, their intentions are deserving of death." Perfected Lord Tianlan said indifferently, "Don't worry, leave the rest to me." These words were said calmly, as if he wasn't at all affected by the huge explosion that had happened before their eyes. Perfected Lord Tianlan himself didn't seem to feel that it was like a slap to his face. Seeing his expression, true monarch Guyu laughed. With their current status, as well as their current relationship, they naturally spoke much more freely. True monarch Guyu smiled and asked him, "That's right. Do you have any thoughts about Shuang? Have you thought about how to deal with her?" Right now, the entire Sky Dragon Mountain, no, probably the entire Immortal City, is guessing how you will deal with her. Perfected Lord Tianlan glanced at him and said, "Those old fellows as well. All of them." Perfected Lord Guyu smiled and said, "They're all watching you." Perfected Lord Tianlan snorted, flicked his sleeves, and turned to walk away, and said the same time, "These fellows want to watch a show. I won't let them. Let's wait for a while first." When he passed through the Red Moon shadow, Lu Chun was in a trance for a moment. It was like an illusion. He only felt that in that instant, a boundless land had suddenly appeared in front of him, and a blood-like light had enveloped the sky and the ground. Everything was barren, and there wasn't a single living thing to be seen. No people, no animals, not even a tree or a blade of grass. It was filled with a deathly stillness. In the next instant, the ground suddenly cracked, and hundreds of huge, blood-colored light pillars shot up from the ground. The surging magma turned into fire dragons and rushed into the sky, wreaking havoc and roaring, and the world was filled with killing intent. Then there was a wave of shrill ghost cries, and countless malicious ghosts, skeletons, and undead creatures rushed out from the huge cracks in the ground, occupying the entire world and spread out like a flood. It was also at this suffocating moment that Lu Chun suddenly heard a resounding dragon roar from high up in the sky. A shadow covered the sky, and even the blood-colored light seemed to dim slightly. Lu Chun struggled to look up and saw that high up in the sky, an incomparably huge black dragon had suddenly appeared, riding on clouds and flying over, and it looked down angrily, looking down at the world with disdain. A moment later, dragon flames spewed out from the dragon's mouth, sweeping across the world and instantly engulfing countless undead creatures underground. However, the undead below seemed to be endless, and they were getting stronger and stronger. Not long after, skeletons and giant undead creatures that were as huge as mountains appeared, and they fought fiercely with the unbelievably powerful black dragon in the sky. This battle seemed to be endless, and it continued just like that, until the illusion disappeared. That moment seemed to only be a moment, but it seemed to make Lu Chun feel as if he had seen 100 years of time. Then there was silence all around, and it was originally dark before his eyes, but after a moment, two dark green lights lit up beside him. Chapter 448. Just as Lu Chen's heart was lifted, the dark flame in his eyes suddenly became gentle again. The two rays of light in the darkness were none other than Atu. Lu Chun walked to his side and wrapped his arms around Atu's neck. He gave him a hug and scratched the fur on Atu's head. He said, "All right, now let's see what's in here. Are you the one who didn't fear being crushed to death?" Atsu rubbed its head against Lu Chen's chest. Lu Chun stood up and looked around. Probably after a period of time, he had almost adapted to the environment here. The scene in front of him was no longer pitch black like when they first came in, but the surroundings were still relatively dim. Vaguely, they could feel that they were in a spacious tunnel, which was similar to the one outside the gravel wall. Maybe it was the same tunnel outside, but they didn't know why it was separated from them by the gravel wall. As for the gravel wall, it should have collapsed in the explosion just now, and a big hole appeared, allowing them to crawl in. But behind them, the original tunnel was also collapsed, completely blocking their way out. After a while, suddenly, a red light shone in from the front of the tunnel. The light was as red as blood, and the figures of Lu Chun and Atsu were reflected in the light. At the same time, With the help of the flashing red light, Lu Chun and Atsu could vaguely see an exit in front of them, and that was where the red light shone. Lu Chun raised his hand and patted Atsu, and said softly, "Let's go and have a look." As he spoke, he strode forward. But after a few steps, he suddenly stopped and looked back at Atsu. He looked up and down at it for a while. Atsu was a little confused. It barked and looked at Lu Chun. Lu Chun shook his head and used his hand to measure the height of Atsu. Then he said, "San Xian, you seem to be fatter than before." The passageway was not very long, and it was precisely because of this that the beam of red light from outside was able to penetrate it. After walking for a while, they passed through the passageway, and a circular arched door appeared in front of them. With the help of the red light, they could see that there were pictures of dragons, tigers, and fierce beasts carved on it. The carvings were exquisite and lifelike. After walking through the arched door, the space before them suddenly opened up. An unimaginably huge space appeared in front of them. The cave that Lu Chun and Atsu were in was dug out from a mountain wall. A stone staircase that was over 1,000 feet long extended downwards and finally landed in a city. That's right, beneath the feet of Lu Chun and Atsu, beneath the gigantic underground cavern, there was an almost complete city. Looking down from this cave entrance, the streets of this hidden underground city were crisscrossed in picturesque disorder. It could be seen that this city had been planned by an expert when it was built. It looked solemn and dignified, extremely imposing. On both sides of the streets in the city, there were also various kinds of houses and pavilions built. The style of these houses was somewhat different from the houses that humans lived in today's world. They seemed to be generally larger. At the same time, the scale of this city was extremely large. The streets and houses stretched forward. Looking down from such a high place, Lu Chun actually could not see the end of the city at first glance. It was just that although the scene in front of him was spectacular, it also had a somewhat strange atmosphere. Firstly, as far as Lu Chun could see, everything in this city below was silent. All the streets and houses were empty. Not to mention people, not even wildcats, dogs, or even living creatures like rats could be seen. Secondly, Lu Chun raised his head and looked up. At this moment, the place where he was standing was close to the dome above the originally dark underground cavern. In his sight, a red moon was suspended in the sky above the city. Countless red lights with streaks of flickering cloud-like afterimages surrounded the blood moon that was as red as blood. At the same time, the blood-red light sprinkled in all directions, covering the entire underground cavern and the entire huge underground city in the blood-red light. Lu Chun remembered the strange dark red light that he saw in the dark tunnel before. It seemed like the source was here. A blood moon was suspended in a huge, empty city. This scene was extremely strange, and people could not help but feel a chill in their hearts. However, Lu Chun and Atsu did not seem to be too frightened. It was probably because they had experienced too many things in the past. Since there was no way back, they could only continue to move forward. Lu Chun patted Atsu's head and walked down. When he walked out of the cave, more red light fell from the sky and sprinkled on his body. It made him look red all over, including his face and eyes. It was a little funny, but also a little scary, because he looked a little like a blood man. When Atsu arrived here, he seemed to have quieted down. He was no longer as lively as before. He walked down beside Lu Chun, and at the same time, he stretched out his nose and sniffed the ground from time to time, as if he was looking for something. However, he seemed to have no clue and found nothing. It was only when he stepped into the city that Lu Chun realized that the feeling he'd had when he looked down from the cave entrance was a little off. The houses in this city were bigger than he had imagined. Compared to the human houses in the immortal city above his head, the houses here were at least twice as big. Looking at those tall and even majestic houses, Lu Chun, who was walking on the abnormally spacious street, felt very small. If there were really people living here in the distant past, then the race that lived here at that time should be at least 2 to 3 times bigger than the human race today. Even the barbarians in the southern wilderness did not have such an exaggerated physical body. Moreover, looking at the huge scale of this city, the original population here must be extremely large. In this dead silence, Liu Chan faintly felt a trace of uneasiness and horror. He naturally thought of the legend about the huge ruins under the immortal city that had been spread in the world for many years. Now it seemed that it was very likely to be related to this city, but where did the people here go? Liu Chan walked on the street for a while and suddenly frowned. After a slight hesitation, he still turned into a tall house on the street. The layout of the houses here was also different from the houses of the human race in the immortal city, and many of the furniture-like things looked like they were made of stone. So after so many years, they still looked undamaged, just covered in dust. But there was no one. Liu Chan walked out with his brows tightly furrowed, and the doubts in his heart grew bigger and bigger. As he continued to walk forward, his gaze swept across his surroundings. Suddenly, he raised his head and revealed a shocked expression. He raised his head and looked forward as if he had seen something inconceivable. In front of him, on the street in the center of the city, there was a huge statue-like thing standing there. However, Liu Chan could not see what the statue was at all, because it looked like it only had half a round body, and it was even the lower half. At the same time, this huge statue pierced the dome of the cave and was actually connected to the soil layer above. Liu Chan retracted his gaze, took a few steps forward, and suddenly stopped. He looked back with some shock, and looked at the nondescript and somewhat strange huge statue. Then, he thought that the position seemed to be similar to the position of the white tiger statue on the ground. Chapter 449. Some things probably couldn't stand up to careful consideration or association. Regardless of whether the truth was really as Liu Chan thought, once he thought of the huge and strangely shaped statue in front of him and the white tiger statue he saw on the ground of the immortal city, he immediately felt that everything seemed to be similar. Originally, the white tiger statue in the immortal city was tall, mighty, and imposing. It was already extremely shocking, and when Liu Chan saw it that day, he couldn't help but exclaim in admiration in his heart. At the same time, he felt nostalgic like many people. He really didn't know what kind of powerful ancient race was able to build such a magnificent statue. Now that he recalled, Liu Chan remembered more details. Although his first impression at that time was that the white tiger statue was majestic and shocking. In fact, the lower half of the statue was not standing. Liu Chan carefully recalled and confirmed that he really didn't see the feet of the white tiger statue. At that time, most people thought that the white tiger was probably a crouching tiger, a ferocious tiger statue lying on the ground with unparalleled majesty. Even if they didn't see the four legs directly, it was probably the technique used when the statue was carved, so they didn't pay too much attention. However, at this moment, standing in the underground city and looking at the scene in front of him, Liu Chan realized that perhaps many people in the immortal city were wrong. Deep underground, there was the other half of the white tiger statue here. The white tiger statue seemed to have passed through two worlds, stepping on both sides of the river. It was unfathomable and unimaginable. Liu Chan looked at the white tiger statue for a long time. Then, he suddenly turned around and looked at the surrounding streets. The statues each occupied half. Then what about the city in front of him? Did these countless tall and silent houses have anything to do with the immortal city on the surface? Huff, huff. Just as Liu Chan was staring at the eerily silent streets and houses in a daze, he suddenly heard a strange sound coming from the side. He turned around to take a look and was stunned for a moment. It was unknown when Atu had been strolling along the side, sniffing and sniffing along the way. He walked to the side of the huge statue in the center of the city. He raised his head and looked up as if he was very surprised by such a huge statue and also a little shocked. Then Atsu rubbed its body on the half statue and smelled it. Finally, it found a corner and lifted one of its legs to pee for a while. Liu Chan was speechless for a moment. Seeing that Atsu seemed to be refreshed after peeing, he wanted to say something but stopped. He looked up at the towering statue and was a little worried that he and Atsu would suddenly be crushed to death. Fortunately, it seemed that this statue was temporarily not efficacious, or the unusually lifelike and breathtaking parts were on the ground of the immortal city, making people feel more comfortable. Don't do this in the future. Liu Chan touched Atsu's head and said, "No matter what, you still have to respect such a huge statue." It was unknown whether Atsu understood or not. It just raised its head and looked at him. After a moment, it suddenly turned its head to look at the other side of the city and let out a low roar. There was hostility and vigilance in that roar, as if it had discovered something. Liu Chen raised his eyebrows and looked in the direction that Atsu was looking at. Then he discovered that in this huge cave that was shrouded in blood-red light, other than the cave on the mountain wall that he had just come down from, there were 7 or 8 similar caves on the mountain wall. There was also a stone staircase that connected to this underground city. And in the direction that Atsu was looking at, a figure suddenly flashed and walked out of the cave on the mountain wall. Liu Chen's expression changed slightly, and he reacted almost immediately. He stretched out his hand and pulled Atsu. His body bent down and rolled from the middle of the road to the bottom of a house on the side of the street. He used a high wall to hide his body. After a moment, Atsu also ran over quietly. At this time, in this place, who would suddenly appear? Liu Chen was not a god. Of course, he did not know what was happening outside at this moment. However, years of being a shadow had long made him develop the habit of putting self-preservation first. After making sure that he and Atsu were hiding, he slowly poked his head out and looked in that direction from afar. On the mountain wall, in the distance, 2 figures appeared one after another. They stood at the top of the cave entrance and looked down at the city below. They seemed to be talking to each other, and then they walked down together. Liu Chen glanced around again. Looking at the empty street, there was a little doubt in his eyes. After that, he continued to observe the situation over there. But after a while, he suddenly frowned because he found that the 2 people seemed to be walking in his direction all the way. Have I been discovered? Or was there another reason? Liu Chan pondered for a moment, but he looked back at the tall and strange statue. At this moment, he and Atsu were almost under this tall statue, and this place was vaguely the center of this city in the catacombs. Almost all the streets led here. He hesitated for a moment, gently touched Atsu, who was lying obediently beside him, and then pointed to the house next to them. After that, he gently got up, bent down, and quietly walked into the door. This house looked tall and complete, with a building and a courtyard. After entering, Liu Chen even found that there was a well in the middle of the courtyard. He walked over and took a look, and then found that there was no trace of water at the bottom. It had become a dry well. He looked around. Being in this house that was much taller than ordinary people, there was indeed a sense of oppression and insignificance. Perhaps the original people who lived here were unusually tall, but now was not the time to think about these things. He called Atsu over, hid behind the door, and then looked out through the very small gap in the door. After an unknown amount of time, a series of footsteps came from afar, getting closer and closer. Atsu was lying on the ground behind Liu Chen, faintly shaking its tail uneasily. Liu Chen turned his head and smiled at it. He reached out and patted Atsu's head, as if to comfort it, and then put his finger on his lips to make a silent gesture. Atsu obediently lowered its head and did not move. Liu Chen looked out again through the small gap in the door. Not long after, 2 figures finally appeared in his sight. It seemed like they didn't live in this city, because they were ordinary humans like Liu Chen. They were men of similar height and stature. And one of them, Liu Chen, even felt that it was a little familiar. After a moment, Liu Chen recognized that person. Because he had seen him a few days ago, it was the chef from the 3 Li Xiang Tavern. Liu Chen was slightly shocked. At this moment, the chef seemed to have changed into a different person. He had a calm temperament, and his eyes were sharp. He was obviously a capable and powerful character. To be able to suddenly appear from the tavern in this strange underground city, needless to say, this chef was obviously strange. Liu Chen laughed coldly in his heart, and then shifted his gaze to the man standing beside the chef. At this moment, he heard the footsteps outside suddenly stop, and the man that he did not know stopped under the statue. He looked a little unhappy and asked, "You brought me so far underground. Where is Elder Gay?" You're tuning in to the Romance Rendezvous YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.